Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland...
So welcome everybody to the 32nd meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf, and our witnesses for today's briefing will also be attending via Starleaf. The meeting will be broadcast live and a recording will be made available on the committee's webpage on the Assembly website. Just to remind members to mute their devices by pushing F4. So moving on then, item number 1 is apologies. We have apologies this morning from Gordon Dunn and also from Christopher Stalford. We hope Christopher's feeling better quickly. Yeah. Moving on then, item number 2, draft minutes. There is a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September at page 5 of your packs. Are members content that these are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Yep.
Okay. Item number 3 then, chairperson's business. We have nothing listed for that this morning. And then, so moving on swiftly to our first briefing this morning, which is from our economists on the economic situation and recovery. There is a clerk's memo at page 14. There's a departmental briefing paper, the COVID-19 additional allocation exercise at page 17. Departmental briefing, economic recovery in the medium term at page 44. A report commissioned by the Department on Integrated Economic Skills and Innovation Policy Agenda at page 58. So members will recall that we as a committee thought it would be very useful to hear from economic experts before receiving a briefing from the Minister next week. So I'd like to welcome to our meeting this morning, and if we could bring them into the spotlight please, Richard Ramsey, who is an economist at Ulster Bank, and Paul McFlynn, who is an economist at the Nevin Institute. So if I hand over to yourselves, and if you would like to make an opening statement, and then we will open it up to questions. And I think, Richard, you're going to go first. Is that correct?
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I suppose what I want to just briefly address in an opening statement is where the economy has come from, where it is, where it's going to go, and what are the challenges and the ability to recover, and long-term challenges and priorities, etc. And I suppose to begin with, even before the pandemic struck, the Northern Ireland economy was in recession. If you look at the PMI survey, it's recorded now 6 consecutive quarters of contraction. And if you look at the official, NISRA's official Northern Ireland Composite Economic Index, which is the nearest thing Northern Ireland has to quarterly GDP, it recorded its first quarter of recession in Q3 of last year, again in Q4, again in Q1, a record rate of decline. So that's 3 already. And then, of course, Q2 is going to see the economy fall at a record rate. And essentially, Q2 is going to represent rock bottom for the economy from an output perspective. And while I said that the economy was in recession last year, and going into this year, that was from an output perspective. From a labour market perspective, we were still having last year flirting with, we had record lows in unemployment, skills shortages, and pretty much that carried into this year as well. But to just sort of like look at the scale of the contraction that we're going to experience, or we're going to see whenever the figures are eventually released for Q2, we're probably going to see output fall by about 25 to 30%. And to put that in perspective, it took, in the last recession, it took 6 years for the composite index to fall, the composite index to fall 10%, and for the private sector component to fall 13%. So effectively, what Northern Ireland is going to has experienced, because it was in Q2, 2 to 2.5 times the decline that occurred in the last recession in 6 years in a single quarter. So when we put that all together for 2020, I expect the economy is going to shrink for the year as a whole by between 12 and 15%. And that's probably over 10 times the scale of the recession that I was predicting at the start of the year before COVID struck. So what we have seen is all the Q2 has seen these freak indicators come in thick and fast, where we've had the likes of new car sales fall 76% year on year, residential property transactions down over 2/3 on a year on year basis. Even on the non-residential or commercial property side, transactions in the second quarter down almost 60% year on year. And house building, the rate of which new dwellings have been completed or finished, that's down at its fastest rate on records by 61% year on year in Q2. And we've seen that with in terms of job vacancies as well. The NIjobs.com and Ulster Bank employment report, the vacancies listed on that website, they fell by over half year on year in the second quarter, and the likes of the hospitality sector was seeing 90% drop on year. And even when you look at within that quarter, April, May and June, you're seeing even more stark figures where even in the likes of car sales, where in the month of April, which was the first month of lockdown, sales were down 99%. So that shows you the sort of context. Q3 in terms of output recovery is underway, and indeed in aspects of some of the sector's recovery, things were improving in May relative to April and June relative to May. But Q3 should see the start of output growth, and indeed the PMI for July and August has revealed that. However, the pace of growth that the PMI is signalling for Northern Ireland's private sector growth in August, 51.7, is disappointing, and it's certainly not a kind of V-shaped recovery of what people might have hoped for. Also, what is concerning with the lack of momentum going into the rest of the year is new orders are contracting significantly again. So that is a concern. We will see a rebound, though, in terms of economic growth as a whole next year, just because of how much we have fallen. You're probably going to see something in the ballpark of maybe a 10% rise after the 12 to 15% fall. That sounds impressive, but remember, we're probably only going to have got back about 2/3 of the lost output by the end of next year. And it's in the first year that's where the low-hanging fruit are plucked in the most quickest way and easiest manner. The recovery will get more difficult and it will slow as time goes on. And my expectation is we're not going to see the economy return to its pre-COVID-19 sort of levels of activity probably until about late 2024, early 2025. So it's a kind of 4 to 5 year recovery timeline. We have seen encouraging signs of recovery, but it's important to stress that they're coming off record lows. So we have seen the likes of car sales in July, best July in 13 years, and we also saw another increase in August. But car sales for the first 8 months of the year are still down 40% relative to where they were last year. If you look at residential property transactions as well, they have seen number of transactions in July quadrupled relative to April's lockdown low, but you're still seeing levels of activity for the first 7 months of the year, half of what it was last year. That's kind of the same for job vacancies as well. So you have seen an increase in vacancies advertised after the April low, up 56% by June, but they're still half of what they were last year. So where are we now? Effectively, I would sort of term we're in this kind of eye of the storm. We've had the sort of hurricanes hit, and there's been a lot of collateral damage caused. Lifting of the restrictions and reopening of the economy has certainly made the economic environment has improved. But unfortunately, this is not the end of it. We are going to see another wave of another storm is going to hit. And indeed, this is going to be most marked in the labour market, where there is more damage to come on the labour market front, more ahead of us than we've actually had already. We have to bear in mind that we've had an unprecedented level of government support, which has effectively prevented an economic collapse. And one of the flagship measures of that was the Furlough Scheme, or the Job Retention Scheme. And it, at this stage, is due to expire at the end of October. And on that basis, I would anticipate that you will see Northern Ireland's very low unemployment rate at the minute, 2.9%, catapulted up into high single digits, and ultimately I would expect it to exceed 10%. The younger generation, the 18 to 24s, are going to bear the brunt of this, and I would anticipate that youth unemployment rate would be expected to hit around 25%. We're also going to see then, as we go into the new year, we're going to anticipate a wave of insolvencies. And remember, whenever we're hearing about the businesses reopening, it is one thing reopening a business, it is quite another to make that business profitable and viable. And that's going to be a key challenge as we go into 2021. So I suppose in terms of the recovery, looking at some of the, what should the short-term priorities be? And, you know, the response in terms of the government's response in terms of providing comprehensive financial packages quickly has been relatively good, although some areas of the economy, such as the arts sector, are still waiting for funding. So a key priority going forward is to continue to open the economy up as much as possible, using technology where appropriate in order to do that, and how we can facilitate and promote economic activity. This is particularly important for the public sector in terms of facilitating the delivery of public services. Deficiencies in technology were highlighted during the lockdown period as being a problem which was stymieing some economic activity. And I suppose it's important what lessons were learned there, how have those deficiencies been addressed to cope with potential other localised lockdowns and disruption going forward. The other main challenge is going to be dealing with the surge in unemployment, how you actually manage that and alleviate it as much as possible. I would be very surprised if we don't see the UK Chancellor unveil more employment support schemes. Not as good as the furlough, not as good as the furlough, as generous as the furlough scheme, which was a blanket support, but more targeted and support, I think, such as wage subsidies or whatever. I would be very surprised if that isn't introduced. The younger generation needs to be targeted, and we've already seen things such as rolling out of more apprenticeships, more places for FE, HE, etc., which is all important. Because ultimately in the younger generation, I think the biggest legacy from COVID-19 is going to be the impact on our school children, the education that they've already lost. We're going to see a increase in the divergence in educational outcomes, particularly with those children from more disadvantaged backgrounds falling further behind. And it's important in the short term that those educational potholes are addressed and filled in as quickly as possible, because that impacts on our skills pipeline in the future. Looking at some of the other key sort of short to medium term priorities, one of the biggest challenges is going to be indebtedness on the corporate sector. In the space of a few months, we've seen the banks lend in effectively emergency funding over £1 billion to local businesses. And that's effectively, they've done that, lent that money in the space of several months, what they would normally lend in several years. And this is going to act on, while we'll expect many of the firms to repay this debt back quickly in the new year, others are going to find it difficult to pay this debt back and actually deal with this on an ongoing basis. So this debt burden is going to impact on SMEs, going to impact on their growth potentials. It's going to constrain them from being able to borrow to invest in the future. So one of the key things is going to be for the economic recovery is how that debt is dealt with. This has been looked at a kind of UK level at the minute, and how that debt can be reduced, removed, or how these firms can be recapitalised. Other sort of longer term, medium to longer term issues are the skills deficit, which never seems to be addressed in an adequate manner. And by that, I mean Northern Ireland continues to churn out a higher proportion of school leavers with no skills or qualifications than any other UK region. It has improved on that over the years, but it's still the worst within the UK. This is a huge barrier to in terms of our creating or plugging some of our skills deficits if people don't even have the basic skills. And it's also a huge cost in terms of the social outcomes and expenditure that then has to follow that as well. Deficits are also apparent in the infrastructure side, particularly in terms of funding our wastewater infrastructure, where it has gone beyond urgent on that front. It is the lack of funding. It's a barrier to growth and development, particularly within Belfast. A lot of our ambitious plans that we have to develop, linked to the likes of city deals, etc., are going to be pipe dreams unless you have the water infrastructure addressed. Also on the infrastructure side, telecoms infrastructure, we're seeing that and sort of rolling out more and super fast broadband, etc. That's incredibly important. It's also a great opportunity now for trying to get more social inclusion across Northern Ireland, and also in terms of between East and West in terms of economic development. With the new working from home era there's opportunity for more offshoring from GB and the Republic of Ireland and even Dublin, but that depends on having the quality infrastructure and telecoms in place. That's also important for education as well, as we can see during the lockdown period, where there was digital inequalities in terms of people's access to broadband and therefore the ability to learn. Another key area is the whole issue of good governance. We're competing with cities and regions around the world and across these islands, and a critical driver or inhibitor to economic competitiveness is the effectiveness and efficiency of all layers of government, be it local, district council level, or like Stormont executive level. The ability to deliver is key. City deals are a great opportunity for Northern Ireland, more funding, but the actual ability to deliver is more important. And that's particularly when it comes to infrastructure investment, where Northern Ireland's track record of being able to deliver infrastructure investment in a timely manner is poor. Legal challenges, procurement and tender difficulties, etc. We've got to the stage where Northern Ireland is recognised as the judicial review capital of the UK, and this urgently needs to be addressed. If we want to have world-class infrastructure, we have to have world-class processes and organisations being able to deliver on that. I suppose then the sort of other challenges that lie ahead are Brexit is another headwind, where at the minute businesses simply don't have the bandwidth to deal with that because they've got enough issues and problems to deal with. You've also got issues such as climate change, which presents both threats and opportunities, also adapting to an ageing population as well. And when we look ahead, I think Northern Ireland is going to need to adapt to the new world that COVID-19 has thrown up, because what COVID-19 has done is it's in many ways it's accelerated trends which were already there, such as digital adoption, such as working from home, such as continuing challenges for the high street, and these need to be embraced, both in terms of digital technology and how working from home is going to change the way we work, both in the public and private sectors going forward as well. So that's my kind of summary of things in the world and the economy as I see it.
Thanks, Richard. Paul, if I hand over to you then.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep. So look, thanks for having me come along to today. I think as Richard outlined in the first part of his presentation, when we're looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the Northern Ireland economy, we are still obviously dealing with a very fluid situation. And the scale of the crisis that we're dealing with at the moment is throwing up numbers that we've never really encountered before. I think in terms of what I wanted to talk about and to focus in on, obviously in terms of the work here at the Institute as well, is very much focused on the labour market impacts that we're likely to see. And where we think we are at present, and what the future prospects are, and what that means very much for policy. I think there are four broad points I'd like to make. The first would be that the timescale, or the time frame of this crisis, has changed considerably since March, since we made the first significant economic intervention into the labour market for this crisis. I think that the situation we're currently in terms of employment in the labour market is actually we're likely to be. It's likely to get worse than what it currently appears, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And I think, and Richard referred to this as well, I think the prospect of a bounce back recovery, which a lot of people had been forecasting for some time, is fading fast. I think we have to accept that obviously a certain amount of employment has been lost. But I think we have to come around to the idea that a certain amount of that employment may have been lost permanently, and that has significant implications for our policy response. And the furlough scheme is obviously the main intervention that we've been policy intervention we've been discussing. And the most pressing issue is that it's going to end at the end of October, and we can have discussions on when the most appropriate time for it to end would be. But the fact is, it's going to have to end at some point, and we probably need to start having the conversation more about what's going to replace it, rather than how much longer we can push it on for. So in terms of the first point, in terms of the timescale or time frame of the crisis, back in March, when the furlough scheme and its self-employment counterpart were first put together, we were very much dealing with a crisis we thought was going to be measured in weeks, possibly months. And the idea of furlough being that we would, freeze the economy and the labour market as it was, and then, take it back out and defrost it once the pandemic, or certainly the acute phase of the pandemic, was over. We were very much dealing with the idea that we were going into a hard lockdown, and then a gradual but a total release from that phase. That picture has changed dramatically since March. One of the most important aspect of furlough from a labour market intervention point of view is that it preserves the relationship between employers and employees, making it much easier for the economy to rapidly readjust once the acute phase is over. It doesn't really work if the ground has shifted over the period of the crisis, and that is more than likely the case that we have seen over the last few months. In terms of where we are now, this kind of touches on what Richard mentioned in terms of, it's one thing to reopen a business, it's another thing to make it profitable. And I kind of think that at the moment, unfortunately, we're in a kind of a sugar rush phase of recovery, where you will have a lot of firms who faced very restrictions which closed them during lockdown, and as the restrictions lifted in the initial phase in May, June, July, that these firms have attempted to get back to normal trade as quickly as possible. in the hope that that getting back up and running would be a boon to their longer term recovery. In many of these cases, they're facing increased costs. They're facing, particularly in terms of staffing, whether that's having to have more staff than usual in terms of managing social distancing or increased cleaning. And in many cases, they're also dealing with reduced trade, whether that's the fact that restrictions still mean they can only have a certain amount of custom, or whether there has just generally been a change in attitudes or consumer behaviour. That operating on that kind of model is fine if you thought that the restrictions were going to peter out almost completely by the end of the summer. That's not what we're facing now. But the reality is that we're going to look at a period of sort of long, lingering restrictions with the possibility of a fallback or a regression, kind of at any point in the future. So that kind of business model isn't sustainable in that kind of environment, and unfortunately, it's more than likely that there'll be significant employment fall off from those type of firms. So when we were looking at how recovery was going to take hold earlier on in the year, lifting restrictions was going to be the key to that. Once we could lift restrictions, then things would bounce back, and I don't think that's going to be the case for a lot of sectors in the economy. And considering that now we're talking much more cautiously about possible vaccines and possible treatments, it could be that the spectre of the reintroduction of restrictions hangs over large parts of our economy for months, if not in many cases, possibly years. So, given this, in terms of the policy space, it's understandable why many people from across the spectrum have said, ending the furlough scheme with the kind of cliff edge, slightly graduated cliff edge in October is quite dangerous. And I think so too. And I think now that we're in the middle of September, the idea that it's going to end completely in 6 weeks is really quite scary. But a replacement for the furlough scheme is inevitable, and that the furlough scheme can be used for a very specific type of crisis, a very time-limited demand or supply shock. If we look back to 2008, when we last saw a significant disruption to our labour market, a shock, a furlough scheme wouldn't have been appropriate then. If you think about it, the crisis first entered the Northern Ireland labour market in the construction sector. If we had put in place a furlough scheme for construction workers, some of them would eventually have returned to construction jobs, but the vast majority of them wouldn't. In 2008, we had a construction sector which had grown to much larger than its historical average, or even by international standards, in terms of its share of the economy. In the immediate crash, we lost over a third, 36% of jobs immediately. But even now, we are 20% below where we were in 2008. So if we had a furlough scheme and that was all we did, we would have, at the end, we would have eventually had to, people would have fallen out of the scheme without those jobs to go back to. And without wanting to be alarmist, we do have to face the possibility that certain other sectors of our economy, whether it's hospitality or leisure or the arts, are possibly going to face a situation where they have a certain amount of jobs that just simply aren't coming back. So in that case, if furlough isn't the most appropriate policy intervention, what is? And I think in terms of the mindset of how we're dealing with this crisis, we have to move from protecting jobs to protecting workers. Furlough is very useful and very effective because it absorbed the initial shock of the lockdown. But in reality, if we had had a proper social security or income protection scheme like they have in many economies in Europe, it would have acted as the same kind of initial shock absorber. We didn't have that, so furlough was necessary. But in the longer term, a retraining and re-employment scheme is going to be necessary to prevent large-scale unemployment, not just short-term, but long-term. And why do I say this is necessary? Because if you look back to 2008, people will say, well, yeah, we had the hit to the construction sector. The construction sector didn't come back to where it was, but the rest of the economy did. Employment, we eventually made up the jobs that we lost. That's true. The difference is that in 2008, it took a very long time for that to happen. And also, and I think this is a crucial point, that the kind of sectors that we would have seen make up the difference, the kind of sectors we would have seen grown to take what had been lost from construction, those kind of service sectors, those kind of fast-growing sectors, are the sectors that are going to be most hit from this crisis and going to be most constrained in the restrictions that remain. So we don't have that kind of organic capacity to recover from this that we've had maybe in previous recessions. And so that's, I think that's why we do need a significant intervention, probably as a financial intervention, as significant as furlough, but something for the more longer term. So I think to summarize, we can't have furlough end in October with nothing to replace it. The situation is probably a bit worse than what it currently appears. We can't expect bounce back. And I think we can't expect the kind of recoveries that we've had in previous recessions. And if we're looking for where we would focus a re-employment and reinvestment scheme, I think Richard gave a very good summary of where our infrastructural deficits are there. And I think if we broadened it out to what Northern Ireland's challenge is with regard to the climate crisis, I think we could find many more challenges in there. But I think if that's okay, I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for those very stark presentations. And I guess it is quite a bleak outlook, although it isn't a great surprise to us at this point, although some of the figures are quite, they're quite stark, to say the least. I guess in terms of where we are now, seems like we're still only in the early stages of this, and as we try to respond to what is still, I suppose, to some extent a mitigation phase, and we do still have the furlough scheme obviously in place for the time being, but as we begin to move forward, are there models elsewhere that are being used in terms of recovery? And I think of the likes of France and Germany, where they have already stated that they're extending their equivalence of the furlough schemes until 2021, I think end of 2021, maybe even 2022 for France. And if we look at the furlough scheme in Germany, I think it actually increases the amount that it subsidises employers with over time rather than decreases it, which is, I suppose, a different approach to what we're seeing. But in terms of that cliff edge that we're potentially looking at and what replaces it, are there examples that we could be looking to? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Just to say, I think and it's quite right that furlough schemes have been extended across Europe, and obviously in the Republic of Ireland scheme as well. I think it's important, though, particularly when we look at an example like Germany. Germany has the infrastructure for retraining and reskilling and redeployment of workers. It has there are plenty of there are actually good and bad examples, but Germany has learned from its attempts at dealing with maybe regional regional economic crisis due to closure of coal mines and things like that, that they kind of continuing their furlough scheme or a flexi furlough scheme, when you have that kind of re-employment and redeployment infrastructure within your labour market is key. To just extend the furlough scheme, but not to put in place that kind of more longer term infrastructure, I think is a danger of just continuing the furlough scheme on its own, because it will end eventually, and I think it's kind of it's not fair to keep people on the idea that they're eventually coming back to work if that's not going to be the case once the scheme ends.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the medium-term recovery document that the department has published. I guess I would have some criticism of it, and there's a lack of clear objectives as to what we're going to do and the actions that it's going to take to achieve those. Again, are there examples that we can be looking at? And you have mentioned some of them there in terms of the likes of the re-employment and the retraining programs that we need to see, sectors to be focusing on, the experience, I suppose, of lockdown and the sectors that perhaps expanded during lockdown, and as we plan for a future where we may face more of this type of thing going forward. But also, the kind of more agile and flexible working that people want to see. Are there opportunities in this that we should be now incorporating into our economic recovery strategy?
Well, if I could just chip in terms of some of the sectors, I suppose what you're seeing is one of the key themes about increasing shift to online shopping has given that Northern Ireland has been so successful in the cybersecurity space over the last number of years, and as Paul was talking about the loss of jobs in construction, and then we had some sectors surging. No economists foresaw the kind of growth in cybersecurity that we saw back then. That's a growth sector. Going forward. But I suppose some of the areas where we need to see activity sort of encouraged and promoted, where we saw in the likes of the lockdown was what struck me in particularly was how lack of IT equipment, relatively basic IT equipment in the likes of the legal sphere, where we had courts had to be closed, where you saw other parts of the UK and other regions, they were actually able to use Skype for Business, all of these kind of functions, where there was pressure to keep things open, because if you keep the courts open in whatever way they can be opened, then you're getting solicitors operating, that sort of money's flowing, barristers, law firms, and all of those kind of things. So it's even how, this is sort of Department for the Economy, is then looking into other departments and how they can ensure you can maximise the operational capacity of the various public services to ensure that all the various activities, whether it's planning, whether it's in terms of the courts, that they are maximised. Because in the likes of social distancing and the health regulations are a problem, but just to give you some examples of what they are doing in the likes of Hong Kong, they would have been requisitioning theatres, cinemas, turning them into courts where they could do social distancing. We've even got likes of our waterfront convention centre, and it's almost like looking at things where there's barriers or blockages to operating business as usual. How can we think and apply, whether it's technology or, as I say, sort of other spaces or workplaces which are out of action because of COVID at the minute?
Thank you. And I guess one of the real challenges, and you both mentioned it, I think, is what is facing young people in the months ahead. That the lack, I suppose, of those jobs that many young people would have taken on while at college, those ones, Paul, that you described as kind of expanding in the last recession, the service sectors. The fact that those aren't going to be there is going to be a huge difficulty. And aside from the investment that we need to see in skills and training for young people, are there other things that we need to be looking at there as well?
Yeah, just to say on the skills bit, I think we will see a lot of younger people moving into full-time education, maybe a greater proportion than would have been expected before. That's absolutely to be welcomed, and I hope we have the capacity within our current system to be able to take that in. But I think one of Northern Ireland's key weaknesses with skills has been that sometimes we, in certain parts of the economy, in certain parts of the system, we can pump out the skills, and we can promote the acquisition of skills by workers. We are less good at promoting the rewarding of skills within companies, within our economy. That yes, the supply of skills needs to go up a gear, but unless the demand for skills is there to absorb it, we are putting people through a expensive enough education system, and we don't have the economy to cater for it on the other side. So I would think that any time a government department takes action on the supply of skills, unless there is a matching program to try and boost the demand for skills in the economy, we're not really going to gain that much ground.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sinead? Can't hear you,
Sinead, you're muted.
You're still muted?
Still muted, Sinead. You might be muted on both your tablet and the sound for the system.
Okay, I've got it now.
Got you,
okay.
Got you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very sobering presentations this morning. And I suppose just as an observation, I think we're at the point here in the life of the executive that we really need to see great leadership, and we need to have an integrated recovery plan, and we can't work in silos anymore. And we need to look at, just from what Richard has said in relation to the deficits that we have around our skills and innovation and our economic policies. We need to make sure that we work collectively together around that. And also, I suppose, my concern is that we have left a lot of people behind with no support and no help at all. And we're going to see, them falling off. And I suppose sometimes we talk about recovery as if we're in recovery. At the moment, I think a lot of people are just in survival mode, and projecting probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks, when the furlough scheme actually ends, we're going to be in dire straits. And can Richard maybe give any examples in how that that we could collectively work better together in terms of a programme for government? Because I don't see any clear priorities being set out. We seem to be reacting in relation to policy rather than actually driving it at the moment.
Well, I suppose in many ways what we're finding now is after the pandemic has struck, we're becoming reminded of what could be termed Northern Ireland's kind of underlying economic health problems, whether it's low productivity, high economic inactivity, the infrastructure deficits that I mentioned before. And yeah, in many ways, I think it's, if you look over the last decade and the recovery from the last recession, I think in my view, Northern Ireland was and policymakers were too obsessed with corporation tax, and we're too focused on things that they couldn't control, that they wanted new levers, whereas we neglected the levers that we do control, be it infrastructure, be it how you can deliver, how we could have delivered the A6 sooner, how we could deliver the A5, how we could do the York Street Exchange, how we can end up doing our wastewater, all of those kind of things, funding that. We control all those, but those have been neglected over the last 10 years. Same with the skills as well. And we almost have to, I think another problem with Northern Ireland economic strategies, our ability to have long-term plans and stick to them. Mm-hmm. It seems as if we just chop and change from a kind of corporate plan to a strategy, which after it's published and it has its day for a couple of years, it's kind of forgotten about. But key kind of metrics such as, for me, if you were waving a magic wand and just fixing two things, it would be sort out the school leaver problem, the low skills, because from that stem so many other problems. And then it's sorting out having your long-term funding for infrastructure investment, and it's sorting out all the kind of blockages and stumbling blocks that we have for delivery of that. If you sorted out those two things, get the skills and the infrastructure, that will provide the environment in which business will thrive, more so than looking to financially support businesses per se. If you get the skills and you get the infrastructure, that creates a better environment conducive for businesses to prosper.
Absolutely agree with you totally there. And that probably brings me to a question to Paul as now. Paul, in relation to, you've done a paper on the powers in Northern Ireland, a new fiscal kind of settlement here. In relation to that investment which is required for skills, for our infrastructure, etc., have you any thoughts on how we find the money to make those long-term investments in order to secure the environment for our future generations?
Yeah, I think what I would say with regard to that is, I mean, my issue with fiscal policy in Northern Ireland is not that there's a sort of a pot of money that we could find in Northern Ireland that HMRC in Westminster can't find. But I suppose from our point of view, it's a longer term that because the executive here doesn't have any skin in the game in terms of being exposed to revenues, being exposed to the health of the Northern Ireland economy. It has never really had the kind of incentives that national governments have had to tackle the kind of things that Richard's been talking about, because those kind of infrastructural investments bring productivity growth. They bring higher value added, which eventually makes its way into more buoyant revenue streams. And I think that's kind of we couldn't see the kind of lock stock devolving of fiscal powers to Northern Ireland as kind of was proposed around corporation tax, but a more subtle way of bringing the executive to a more substantial fiscal role. And it also requires a complete refurb job on how we spend money coming from the Barnett formula and things like that. But I think in terms of how the executive would seek to recover from COVID, obviously at this moment in time, the scale of the money and support that's going to be needed in Northern Ireland is beyond anything that we've encountered before, and we really do need to be looking at Westminster and lobbying very, very significantly there for a more substantial scheme to replace furlough, which can ensure that we don't see that kind of rapid increase in unemployment that will come at the end of October if the scheme just ends abruptly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sinead. Gary?
Hello, thanks Chair for bringing me in, and thanks Richard and Paul for those presentations. Obviously it was very useful and detailed, and we welcome that. And we always have to be mindful that when we're dealing with statistics and figures, whilst we all may be blown away by them, the reality is that, you know, these involve actual human beings and families who face the prospect of unemployment and financial ruin. So we have to be just mindful of that. I suppose, Richard, you touched on when you were giving your presentation around the priorities, and I think that it's fair to say that the Minister has been focused in terms of her number one priority in ensuring that we can get the economy open again. Now, she has faced opposition in trying to do that, but we do recognise the fact that when support measures were vital and grants were very much needed, that's not going to ensure that our economy recovers. That just keeps certain businesses afloat, which is obviously important, but it's not going to ensure that we can recover in the long term. One of the concerns that I do have is around the fact that we do talk about technology and working from home, which is fantastic in terms of ensuring that people are safe and we can adhere to social distancing measures. The downside of that, of course, is the fact that there's nobody in our town centres or city centres. So whilst for example, Richard, you talked about the legal services. You know, we have seen a complete shutdown because the infrastructure doesn't exist to allow for those types of services to proceed. But on the other hand, that if that infrastructure did exist, what would help over those past couple of months, going forward, we need to get people back into those courtrooms and back into the city centre, because the businesses that have survived and are reopened, they're not going to be surviving for much longer because there's nobody coming into them, because those office workers aren't there to buy their sandwich or buy their cup of coffee or to go and get their hair done, all of those things. So I just want to hear your views on that in terms of the downside, I suppose, of the technology and the fact that, you know, we do need to get people back into their places of employment. The second point that I wanted to touch on was around the Nasra figures which were released yesterday. They talk about the Northern Ireland unemployment rate increased for the quarter to 2.9%. The quarterly change was obviously significant. The Northern Ireland unemployment rate was below the UK rate, which was 4.1%. The Republic of Ireland rate was 5.3%, and the EU 27 rate was 6.7%. I just want to get your views on that in terms of other EU countries may have, I suppose, an advantage in terms of their technological capacity. But is there a downside in that, in the sense that, you know, we're seeing maybe more traditional employments suffer at the hands of that?
Yeah, so I suppose going to your first question just about the downside from working from home, certainly it is a major problem with city centres, town centres, where people working from home. The whole kind of sandwich economy has nosedived. As I suppose there are some areas that are benefiting from that. So even in the likes of Belfast, some of the suburbs and outer areas, they are kind of bustling and benefiting at the expense of the other bars and or cafes and restaurants in the city centre. I suppose what this is doing is accelerating the trend that was already there in terms of the challenges that the high street was facing with people shopping online as well as another thing. The natural sort of response to that would be what we need is more people living in town centres or in the city centres, and that's where you would get the footfall. But for the likes of Belfast and an increasing number of areas around Northern Ireland, that's not possible for the simple reason we don't have the wastewater infrastructure. So a lot of the solutions that we would try and deal with some of the problems that are emerging are kind of back or link back to some of those other wider issues, such as the infrastructure deficit and challenging those. And I suppose the challenge, even about getting back to the office, is then getting back to the office is one thing, but you then have to then adhere to the various restrictions and guidelines, which would then limit the capacity of which offices can function. So that is a challenge, but as I said before, that's also an opportunity working from home. If you're less focused on a particular place, particularly if you're in the northwest, you then have the potential to take a job which is notionally based in Belfast or further afield, but actually perform that further at home or closer to home. And sorry, your second question about then with the Nasra figures and then technological capacity of other countries, was that just their ability? How successful are they to?
Yes, I suppose my point being is that the unemployment rate is higher in other areas, and what the point that I'm trying to make is that their shift to whether it be financial services, all those other sectors that maybe don't involve being in a physical premises. That's my point. It's just that what is the reason for that?
What is the I suppose again that this is an opportunity for Northern Ireland in terms of how it can take jobs from elsewhere when they are looking to sort of offshore some of the jobs where we've seen some of the employment growth from the in recent years, the kind of Fintrues, the all states, a lot of the legal, Herbert Smith and Allen and Overy and all of those sort of things, where the attractiveness of Northern Ireland as a relatively low cost of living, ability to buy a house, all of those kind of things, then you get the increasing push from companies who are going to be cutting costs and looking at offshoring and outsourcing. That's a great opportunity for Northern Ireland for new jobs, etc. But that's where you need the telecoms infrastructure. That's what is going to be where you've got your sort of competitive edge. If you have the right infrastructure, suitable speeds, etc., you are able to then become an attractive proposition to try and shift more of those jobs out of those other higher cost regions to Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. John Stewart. Go ahead, John.
John, I think you're still muted.
But we can't see
There we
you.
go. There we go.
Have you got me now?
Yeah.
I hear you. Yeah, still no picture.
Yeah. Apologies, Richard, Paul. You can't see me, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Thank you for your presentation. As has been said, these are some very stark figures, probably what we expected to hear, and given what we've gone through over the last 6 to 7 months. But as Gary has said, these are people, and we have to be aware of that. In terms of a number of things, you talked about investment in our infrastructure here, Richard, and how important that was. And I think we're coming to see just how the impact of a lack of investment here over time, particularly in our roads and in our utilities, particularly water as well, when it comes to our town centres. And I totally agree with you on that point. One of the areas we've been discussing in the last few weeks is our SMEs and how important they are to the backbone of the economy in Northern Ireland. And the particular lack of support that they've received here. I'm just conscious to get your feelings for how important the SME sector is in Northern Ireland, and what you think we could be doing more to prop them up, especially given what you said, Richard, about the amount of debt that a lot of them have taken on and the impact that's going to have in the coming months and years.
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, couldn't agree more on the SMEs, the importance of SMEs. It's Northern Ireland, we've an SME economy. I suppose what I think we will see with the likes of Invest Northern Ireland is I think we will see a greater shift towards it's becoming more focused on SMEs and less focused on some of the larger firms, because given the economic environment we're in and this kind of like new era, it is going to be the case where financial support is going to have to reach, it essentially is going to have to increase its client base. It's going to have to reach more clients and be more focused on targeted initiatives, such as some of the ones which were announced in recent days and weeks, such as the kind of digital adaptation sort of funds and things for that. But I would foresee that where Invest NI is going to channel its funds will be more into support and programs for the SME base and less on financial support on some of the things that we've seen over the years, where the big kind of 10 million plus assistance for firms, sometimes on a repeated basis. I think that kind of era has passed and will be more in terms of what you can actually do to the smaller firms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Paul, you talked about the importance of the furlough scheme, and I think we're all in agreement on that. There was a motion passed in the Assembly last week calling on the Chancellor to extend that scheme, because we don't want to see the cliff edge that you referred to. Obviously, that's not in our gift to extend it, and we can only continue to call for it. If you were, I suppose, in charge of the Department of Economy, and you were looking and the executive in terms of an economic recovery strategy, what key schemes in addition to the skills you talked about would you like to see, or would you want to implement in order to see a quick and economic recovery here?
I think in terms of the furlough scheme, I think, you know, even if we were a couple of weeks back and we were looking at the furlough scheme ending in October, we may have had the time to be actually able to put in place a replacement for it. The flexi furlough, I think, could continue in its current form, and there's definitely an argument for that in terms of helping companies who maybe aren't back at full level operation. And in other countries, it's referred to as a short-time work scheme, and it's a permanent feature of labour markets there. Germany operates a very successful one, and it's built in there in terms of it's there beforehand, and so companies, when a shock happens, can make use of it. I think in terms of what Northern Ireland's the Northern Ireland executive could do if the furlough scheme was going to be extended, is to look for it to be joined together with a re-employment or retraining scheme. I suppose my main worry with just a blanket extension of the furlough scheme is that we'll end up in March in the same situation as what we're going to end up in October, with just slightly fewer people. There are going to be, the furlough scheme will have to end, whether that happens gradually or it happens starkly in October or starkly in March. It's the idea that nothing has changed in the economy, and therefore people coming out the other end of furlough aren't going to require any further assistance to get back into the labour market. The ground has shifted. We can't lift people up from where they were and place them back down exactly where they were again. Some people are going to find that what they left is no longer there, and there is an onus on government to intervene there, because, to be quite blunt about it, government is the one that shifted the ground. We have put in place the restrictions, and look, we've done it for the best of reasons, but government is responsible for the economic hardship that's going to transpire from that for lots of workers.
Okay, thank you. Just one very final point, and that's on the housing market. I think it surprised a lot of people that we haven't seen a decline in the housing market, and perhaps that's because of the scheme introduced by the government around the tax and things. But I'm just wondering, with the rising unemployment and the impacts here on the economy, what are you predicting for the housing market here in Northern Ireland in terms of sales and valuation of houses?
Well, I think I'll take that one. In terms of what we have seen is the housing market was shut down for a period of time during the lockdown, so sales could not take place. What has surprised me in the housing market is then the fact that the number of people who hadn't thought of moving, then through their experience of lockdown, then were deciding that they did want to move. So what you are seeing is, as Paul kind of described, is there's an element of a sugar rush going on, where you've had closure, now it's reopened, people are now surging to buy, and you hear about sort of highest sales or figures in 5 years or something like that, whether that's referring to August. But as I said in the beginning, sales up until July were half of what they were last year. I expect, this year they're going to be half. For the end of the year, they'll be about half. So transactions are going to be small. What we're also seeing is maximum loan to value ratios have fallen way back from 95% to 80-85 for first-time buyers. First-time buyers drive the housing market. Many of them are now going to have to look at the likes of co-ownership instead, and we've seen demand for co-ownership treble. So I think the housing market, in terms of transactions, the housing market will have more of a hangover next year than what it currently has. It isn't immune from what's happening in the rest of the economy. And you bear in mind, buying a house is the biggest discretionary expenditure item that you would buy as a consumer. Consumer confidence will be impacted by unemployment, job losses, all of those sort of effects. It's almost at the minute the housing market seems to be the last dog to bark. We've had the labour market's already started to go, but the housing market seems to have held up well. What we've also seen in the housing market is there's fewer houses being built, so supply is being reduced. That on its own will help to prop up prices, but mortgage volumes, etc., for this year and next year are going to be well down on what they were last year.
Thank you for that, Richard. Really appreciate it, and thank you, Paul.
Thank you. John O'Dowd?
Thank you to Richard and Paul. A very interesting, if not alarming, presentation from you both. It's interesting in terms of how economic strategies to and fro, and Richard, you had mentioned the concentration on corporation tax. I recall a time when, public sector workers were deemed as a drain on the economy, and now we're being told that we need public sector workers back into our city centres to buy sandwiches and coffee to save the economy. So it's interesting how these things go back and forth. But I want to ask a question in relation to Brexit, because the economic discussions we're having here, and it was interesting, Richard, you had said, I'm not saying putting words in your mouth, but in 2019 we were going into recession, or we were in recession. And you think by 2024 we will return to 2019 conditions around that, which in fairness isn't great. We want to be progressing. But I want to ask you, what impact will it have on our economy if we have a no trade deal with the EU?
No trade deal with the EU. That's it's going to be devastating for Northern Ireland economy, more so for the UK economy. But it's just bad news all round. What we've already seen is the kind of Brexit uncertainty over the last number of years has seen a lack of investment by businesses, and on the run up to this, we just have, with a no deal just then heaps more uncertainty on an already very uncertain and financially fragile world, and businesses just do not have the bandwidth to deal when they're trying to make their business work and try and battle to stay. They're in survival mode. Just layering more uncertainty with a no-deal Brexit is just going to it'll put some businesses under, and it'll just it'll cause disruption for the economy as a whole. And my view is that Brexit, even if it's not a no deal, it's the ongoing uncertainty and changes with Brexit will act as a dampener on growth for the Northern Ireland economy next year and beyond.
And have you factored that into your prediction that it'll be 2024? Even say there is a deal, that into your prediction that it'll be 2024 before the economy returns to, say, 2019 standards?
Not if it's no deal.
Okay.
Mine's on the basis that there kind of would be a deal, but with a lot of these forecasts, given the extremes of what we have seen and the sort of falls that we have seen, that's that is a sort of like broad projection, but certainly throwing a no deal into it would just be a fly in the ointment, to put it mildly. Okay,
and Paul, maybe you want to comment on that question as well, but also want to ask you about your comment. Again, not putting words into your mouth, but the stage we're at now is about protecting workers, and you mentioned the weak social security system we have, and in terms of how that would act as a protection if we had a good social security system in terms of in the absence of furlough, etc. But can I also ask in terms of what this is a short, medium to long-term project, as many economic predictions are. But in your view, what should we do now? Because in my mind, it's about holding on to what we have, and your phrase was protecting workers. What do we do now to protect workers?
I think the first thing is that we need to protect their incomes. And when I say that furlough can end, I think the support to workers has to remain, but that we go from the emphasis on supporting workers until they can get back into their original jobs to supporting workers until the state can get them back into. Now that doesn't necessarily mean the state putting them into public sector jobs, but that we have to recognise an obligation to workers for whom the economic activity in which they worked has been removed from the economy and is not likely to return in any stable form in the near future. That it goes from preserving their relationship with their employer, which is what furlough was all about, to assuming the responsibility for getting them back into work. And I see a direct connection between that and the infrastructural deficits that have been outlined here today. They were necessary before this in terms of the proper functioning of the Northern Ireland economy. They're necessary now because we're going to have a large section of the labour force which isn't going to be able to find employment readily. And it's not a new concept. It's as old as John Maynard Keynes, but that we have the infrastructural deficits, and we're going to have a section of the labour force that's going to require new employment, and we just have to bring those two strands together.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. And I could just pick up on John's point there about the impact of Brexit. I think there's an analysis by London School of Economics that shows that while all businesses are negatively impacted by COVID and will be negatively impacted by Brexit, those worst impacted by COVID are different from those that are most likely to be badly hit by Brexit. So we're getting a real double whammy there in terms of the negative economic outlook if there's a no deal. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, moving on then. Claire? Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning everyone, and thank you for the presentations. A lot of other members have covered some of the points that I was hoping to ask. Excuse me. I want to pick up, Richard, I think it was you who had made a point in around the city deals and I suppose the growth deals, which sort of complement those city deals. Is there a suggestion now that in the new context in which we're operating, those are potentially risky, and maybe it's something we shouldn't be pursuing if there is a chance that maybe we won't be able to fulfil the aims from those projects? The other thing that you had mentioned as well, which I thought was quite interesting, was about the pipeline in terms of the skills down the line, particularly with those school children who maybe have missed their education. My assumption, and maybe wrongly, would have been that school children are quite resilient. They're like sponges. They would have been able to pick that up again. So I am interested to hear your points in and around that. And I suppose even on the point of skills, is there opportunities in this new kind of space which we have to work, that we could be promoting different types of skills, maybe more virtual type skills? I think John made the point in the chamber yesterday around the technology sector, how it is probably one of the areas that's doing quite well. Is that something that we should be looking towards in terms of trying to promote the type of industries that actually will have jobs at the end of it, insofar as our skills, should further and higher education be creating almost those skill academies that we used to have that looked at actually providing what employers and industry needs, rather than just, I suppose, turning out qualifications that are really difficult to get jobs within. Also, the interesting point, I think you've already covered this in response to John Stewart's questions. I wasn't surprised to hear that car sales and property seemed to increase during lockdown, and I take your point around that bottleneck then being released again in August. But I wonder again, is there opportunities with that, or are we leading ourselves down a difficult path, because those types of sales do come with commitment, financial commitment, and is there almost are we setting ourselves up for a fall in that respect when people are buying these things, and maybe the employment and economy is going to be vulnerable in the months and years ahead? So sorry, there was a few things there.
Yeah, so I suppose just on the issue of city deals, if it was the likes of the Belfast one, you've got and linking into kind of like Belfast sort of greater plan, when there's talk about bringing the likes of 60,000 people in to increase the number of people living there by 60,000, you're not going to be able to do that unless you address the water infrastructure, because at the minute they're saying that you cannot have any additional demands placed on some of the areas in Belfast, and indeed there's numerous towns around the country are like that. So it's more, the risk is just, well, you cannot deliver the plan, and it's, I think this is a kind of symptom of what we have in Northern Ireland, where invariably we're after getting the money, and it's almost getting the money and getting the funding is almost the kind of job done, whereas it's actually only that's the beginning of it, and actually being able to deliver on that. So it's just, wastewater infrastructure is going to impact on the city sort of deals in some shape or form. I'm just not aware of the exact detail, but it's kind of a fallback position. Yeah. When you're saying about the pipeline schools and children being resilient, etc., they are. But if you think even before this, we were churning out school leavers, higher proportion with no skills and qualifications whatsoever. You've had the disruption. What you've had is the normal kind of variation that you would have in a class in terms of ability and performance, that is going to have widened considerably. Indeed, there's been research from, I think it's the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which was talking about you will see some of the most deprived children will be about 18 months behind their peers come the age of 16. I think we're going to see a surge in this, given what we've already experienced. You're going to see a surge in underperformance and this widening in educational standards, because what you would have seen is, I'm aware of a lot of children just simply kind of going off the grid, as it were, in the lockdown. And if I was a teacher trying to teach now in a class, you're going to find that the abilities are going to have just dispersed over the range where you're actually having to cope with and teach now. So it's almost, how do you do that? In England, they're doing catch up and things, and how do you get into that? I'm also thinking Northern Ireland always has an oversupply of graduate teachers. Is there something that we can leverage in and get people in? Again, this serves two functions: catching up on the lost education and targeting particularly the most disadvantaged, and getting graduate teachers in gainful employment, or even if it's getting teachers out of retirement to do all this. I think it is important to do that. Your issue on virtual skills and all of those kind of things, yes, it's all something to look at, and the kind of skills and that children are doing at schools now compared to what I did back in my day, or night and day difference. But all of those kind of skills, coding, those kind of things, very important.
Okay. Yeah, no, I really do take your point in relation to skilled children, and I my comments around COVID would be that it's probably already deepening the cracks that already exist. And I think it's concerning because we needed to tackle that before COVID, and if anything now we need to provide a focus there. I suppose I was thinking of it around maybe younger children and then that pipeline, but there's issues in and around that age group as well. But I suppose if we as a committee were looking at this from an economy perspective and in a higher education perspective, is there more that we could be doing around the NEETs group to ensure that we don't lose sight of those individuals, because that's already a challenge. And I really do think you make a valid point in respect of that. So it'd be something that I would be keen to go back to the department with, because one of those things, if we don't put a focus on it, then it's too late, further down the line.
I think it's also worth pointing out is those group of disadvantaged school children and that kind of cohort, nobody is going to come to represent them or come up to Stormont and ask for a package. All other kind of interests do have that. They don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and we have a responsibility there for their aspirations as much as how that impacts on the economy. So I really do appreciate you making that point, and I think it's one that I certainly, as a member of this committee, would like to pursue. To come back to the city growth deal, yeah, I find those comments really interesting because you're not the first to say them to me. I think when we got that over the line, and everybody was celebrating that and the money, and it was all of that, people forgot that it has to be, for it to be truly successful, it needs to be a strategy which can be fulfilled and completed and come to a conclusion. And I think there maybe does need to be that reflection moving forward, so that we can make the most of these opportunities and make the most of those money. But again, it comes back to points that I think Sinead had made around cross-departmental working and trying to recognise how we make the most of that. And that's strategy, that's good governance, but I bang on about that a lot. But no, look, thank you, I appreciate that. It was a really interesting presentation.
Thanks, Claire. Stuart.
Thank you very much, and like Claire probably would suggest that most of the questions that I would like to ask have already been asked, but following what I think can be reasonably described as a thoroughly depressing comment this morning, what, if any, opportunities do you see for us in terms of the future of the economy? I know you've set out the sort of the big ticket issues with regards to infrastructure and education and things we need to do to step up and to prepare for the next number of years that get us to 24, 25, and hopefully we put in place processes and procedures that will allow business to build and the economy to rebuild over that period of time. But are there any opportunities now that we should be taking advantage of, even in the teeth of where we are in relation to this pandemic? In addition to that, I think people will have been very struck by your comments around how the lack of IT has actually hit in terms of even, for example, the public sector's ability to do its job. I was at a meeting in the Department of the Economy. I was actually in Netherlands last week and walked past the 3 floors of empty office blocks, and I was getting out of the car, I was glancing through the windows, and all you could see was serried rows of desktop computers. I doubt that the Department of the Economy has substituted those with laptops for people at home. People are using Heath Robinson connections to actually do their business from home, and we have government departments that need to step up, let alone the private sector that needs to step up in terms of IT. Reference was made, I think Paul made reference to what replaces furlough, and is that more down the line of supporting workers rather than supporting business? I'd like him to expand a little more on what actually supporting workers would look like, or what he sees supporting workers looks like, and how that would fit into the priorities of the Department of the Economy, because it's just difficult to see at this point in time a Department of the Economy which is it claims to be business focused, and I see little evidence of it actually being employee or worker focused for the future. And maybe slightly tongue-in-cheek, do you really see a minister that seems fixated with a ham sandwich economy actually cutting the mustard?
I suppose I could take that up there. I think the point about moving from supporting, and it's not about saying, it's a mind shift in terms of from supporting jobs to supporting workers, because I think in many of these instances we're going to see firms that will survive, but will survive in a different form, and quite possibly with just not the kind of staffing levels that they had previously had. In certain circumstances, I think you'll find the lockdown has had the effect on a few businesses of maybe pushing them towards technology or automation, which they hadn't considered before, because they hadn't had the incentive toward doing it. But many businesses have had to find much more innovative ways of carrying out their trade. And unfortunately, in that circumstance, it's just no longer viable for them to bring workers back. That's, if anything, an effect of COVID pushing something that maybe would have organically occurred further on. So it's not sort of saying that we stop supporting businesses and we start supporting workers, but it's the idea that we're not supporting a worker to remain as they were before the crisis, that we have to equip that worker who's going to be going back to seek new work. We have to equip them with the skills and the resources that they're going to need to regain employment. I think.
Paid during, and that if we reimagine what post-furlough is going to look like, it should be a very flexible scheme that includes people perhaps going part-time back to employment, and the rest of the time should be retraining, new skills, FE.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think as well, I mean, because I think training as a sort of as a full-time kind of, we say putting people into training, coupling training with existing work, in many cases could save jobs by upskilling workers within firms. And you talked about opportunities. It's a fairly bleak vista that we're staring down at here. But if there is one benefit that we could get out of this entire crisis, is that many of the jobs that will have been destroyed will have been lower value added, lower paid jobs that weren't very good for the people that worked in them. And that if we can move towards an economy where we focus more on job quality rather than just job quantity, we may have been actually able to garner something better at the other end of this crisis.
Thank you. Rich?
Just to add in on some of the opportunities, I suppose it's building on cybersecurity, where Northern Ireland has the was it the highest concentrate. Belfast is the highest concentration of cybersecurity jobs in Europe. Given what's happening, the move towards online is only going to continue. Online cybersecurity, and we've had the whole Huawei issue as well. That is just a massive growth sector going forward. So it's how do we build on that, not just in cybersecurity, but kind of wider ICT as well. And it's also areas such as healthcare and pharma as well, because one of the things that we've seen is this has been a health emergency. You're likely to see more emphasis on restructuring aspects of the NHS and focus on sort of vaccines and just the whole pharmaceutical space. Also, could be opportunities with, in terms of global supply chains are being kind of de-risked and changed because of if overexposed to China. That's already happening, and that could present opportunities where they're talking about firms are they're not maybe totally leaving China, but it's the idea of having maybe a China plus one, an alternative supplier, and that could be for some of our manufacturers. You could see that you're seeing maybe more, dare I say it, European sort of markets being set up on which we could link into. And as I said, there's the kind of working from home, outsourcing, our ability now with technology. Before, the idea of taking a job in London and doing it remotely, wasn't really a sort of viable option. You would have at least had to have spent some sort of time flying over, commuting or whatever. Whereas it's now the kind of working from home era has opened up that possibility, and it's how do you turn that into what about public sector in terms of how does it can help reduce congestion in towns and cities if people are able to avail of that, whether you look at some of the property that you have, and whether you go for more regional hubs as opposed to a sort of like central location where people then can come in and work there. And I suppose what we did see with Northern Ireland was we had a shortage of grade A office space for FDI, and given what is maybe you're going to see the change in commercial property, what's going to happen there, you could well see that there's grade A office space actually freed up, and our lack of grade A office space will not be as limiting factor as it was previously. And just finally, I would also then just say about when we're talking about job losses and businesses failing, don't underestimate how that can actually be a positive, because when you think of back in the early 2000s when Nortel failed as a business, and it was a huge employer and it was seen to be devastating at the time, scores of people who were employed in that company ended up going in, starting their own businesses, working in other companies, and are now responsible for the kind of flourishing IT and even in terms of the cybersecurity sector that we see today. So I think what that means is then think of in terms of for next year how important it is with the whole idea of business start programs for people who are coming out from changing jobs, that there could be opportunities if the support is given probably next year rather than not now, given all the noise that is going on at the minute. That's worth thinking about.
But there is an area of people at the moment, they describe themselves as excluded from current schemes. These are the small, new, up-and-coming micro-businesses, and they're not being supported at the moment. I would hate us to see that we would jump ahead and start to support those types of businesses in the future, but leave behind those that are struggling now.
Yeah, one of the reasons why some of those businesses haven't been supported is because some of them are bank outside some of the main banks, they're unable to get the business bounce back loans, which are only available. That support is only available for the main banks who subscribe to the scheme.
You made reference in your talk, Richard, earlier on about the level of insolvency that was likely to be coming down the line. You didn't actually say what that level would be. Could you just very briefly answer that for us?
Well, I wouldn't be any more sort of scientific just about in terms of it will surge, because what you're seeing is, while we've talking about the likes of furlough, the furlough period expiring, there's been a number of interventions which have created this kind of calm, where we're in the eye of the storm, where things don't look too bad at present. But it's deferral of VAT. It's you cannot be evicted from your tenancy. All of those kind of things. So once they wear off and expire, and assuming they're not renewed, you're just going to see that then start to surge. But sorry, I can't be more scientific than that. What I would say though is, what we in the bank are sort of seeing at the minute is, at this stage, the levels of stress are kind of what we're seeing is what we would see in business as usual. So that kind of wave has not yet hit. But because we've got things such as the furlough scheme and all of those other mitigations already in place, and the kind of business, the emergency loans, etc., that is something which is probably going to be more apparent in 2021 than in 2020.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Oh. Is it just us?
No, hang on. Something's gone horribly wrong there.
Can you still hear us? No?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think we're just internal now.
I think they can still hear us.
Yeah. I know, but that we can get that through the main system. Just let me.
Okay, so I'm having some technical difficulties here.
Can I ask a quick question while you sort your...
Yeah, go ahead.
Richard and Paul, we've talked about infrastructure in around Belfast, Yorkgate, etc. But one of the infrastructural issues in the new decade, your approach, is the high-speed link between Belfast and Dublin. And I look at that from all politics is local, so I have a constituency interest in this. For far too long, I think that link has been seen as attracting business into Belfast or business into Dublin. But the issue around high quality office space, what attracts my attention to this, we could have workers from Dublin, Drogheda and Dundalk sitting in Uri, Portadown, Lurgan or Belfast within an hour. So I think there needs to be a focus or certainly a development of a discussion as to how we attract office workers and investment from areas which have now very, very high costs. When you look at the cost of Dublin, Drogheda and Dundalk across the border into Newry and constituencies such as mine, is that a viable prospect?
Couldn't agree more with that. And because if you think back, what we want is for Northern Ireland to be an attractive place to live, work and visit. And whether it's you're getting people who are actually choosing to work in Dublin or south of the border and live in Northern Ireland, all of that, they contribute to the economy, spending, consumer spending, all of those sort of things. So yes, I just see that as being kind of an untapped resource that we should be sort of more proactive in trying to go after, because particularly when you see then for young people, as young people in particular, the cost of rents in Dublin and things like that are so prohibitive. I think you would be, pushing on an open door there where people would be, it just has to change the focus.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. It appears we are still broadcasting, so we're kind of okay. Look, thank you both very much. It has been really useful, and there's a lot of takeaways. I think in particular for me, the takeaway around the replacement of the furlough scheme and how we can kind of support workers through a hybrid model of wage subsidy and training support. I think that's something that we'll want to pick up on further. So look, thank you both very much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just bring Katy in.
Can we bring Katy Hayward into the spotlight, please? There we go. So we're moving on then to item number 5, which is our briefing from Professor Katy Hayward on the UK Internal Market Bill. Katy, first of all, apologies for keeping you waiting. Members, there's a clerk's memo at page 75. The UK Internal Market Bill is at page 81, explanatory notes at page 135, the Bill's impact assessment page 175, a memo from BES at page 221, a Welsh Parliament research paper at page 235, a paper from the Economic Social Research Institute on NI inputs to the ROI EU FTA exports at page 275. Response from the Department on Scrutiny points raised in a Assembly research paper on page 310. A House of Commons Library briefing paper on the Internal Market Bill at page 3 of your table papers, and the UK Government's legal position on the UK Internal Market Bill and NI Protocol at page 78 of your table papers. So obviously that bill was introduced last Wednesday to the House of Commons, and it passed its second reading and has now progressed to committee stage. The clerk has written to the department to seek information on the Minister's intentions in terms of an LCM. Katy, welcome to our meeting, and first of all I'd like to congratulate you on your recent chairship. I think well deserved. If I hand over to you just to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and it's an honour to appear before the committee. I just propose, you've had a lot of reading there, so I just propose to give an outline of where this comes from, I guess. The key points in the bill, both relating to devolution and, of course, relating to the protocol, and then just a small conclusion about what it all might mean. So in terms of the context, it's worth bearing in mind, I guess, the model of the EU single market and a couple of principles in that, and how it might give us an idea of some of the concerns that have been raised about the UK's approach to the internal market, as we see in this bill, and also some of the logic behind it. So I guess the principle behind any legislation relating to single markets, internal markets, is that where you have legislative differences and autonomy in making regulations, it can produce barriers to trade and it can distort competition. Within the EU single market, we saw two approaches to managing that challenge. One is that of so-called negative integration, so you're basically removing barriers to trade in order to, in principle, allow goods to be sold across the UK and services, free movement of services, etc. And then there's a positive approach, if you like, which is harmonising rules. So you see harmonised standards in relation to toy safety, chemicals, etc. We're very familiar with this because a lot of that has, of course, come through in the Ireland Northern Ireland Protocol. And the development of the EU model has been including measures of governance and justification for exemptions, and the legal regime, which enables the single market to function. It's highly developed, and as we know, there have been concerns about it as well as those who are advocating it. Now, when Brexit comes along, we have a situation in which the devolved competences, which allow distinct legislative activities within the UK, can potentially give rise to barriers to trade within the United Kingdom. So it was the application of those common rules of the EU that allowed devolution to function as it did. Outside of those, we have a potential problem, and this was identified early on in the Brexit process. Analysis conducted by the Cabinet Office over time, but confirmed in 2019, talked about there being around 160 areas where you could have, where you had the EU essentially legislating or giving directives in certain areas that devolved legislators were responsible for, and these could therefore potentially give rise to difficulties. So there were three main approaches to that. One was to identify areas where you didn't really need to do anything other than adhere to general common principles, and so no change was needed, such as maximum driver hours. There are almost 80 policy areas where it was considered there needs to be non-legislative common framework agreements. So again, essentially things like memorandums of understanding, working together across the devolved legislators to agree those in principle. And it's notable that in some of those areas we have the Ireland Northern Ireland Protocol with competence, including such thing as waste management. And then in around 21 areas, it was seen as necessary to have legislation, and this is where we have the common frameworks. This was to ensure commonality, and the idea was that you'd have the devolved legislators working together on this to agree the minimum and the maximum, if you like, standards in those areas. 21 of these related to Northern Ireland, 17 of them are covered by the protocol, such as GMOs, issue in relation to the sale of medicines, animal welfare, etc. This was the way in which we presumed that the pressures on the UK internal market were going to be dealt with through common framework. It was becoming clear that the time frame was very tight and that these wouldn't be produced in time for the end of the transition period. And there were rumours in late spring, early summer that there was some plan for UK-wide legislation to address this fundamental issue about the UK internal market. The white paper was produced in July, defining the UK internal market rather vaguely as a total set of trading relationships existing across the UK. It had three main elements. One was a market access commitment. One was the idea of having potentially a monitoring authority, and then a UK-wide subsidy regime. We know that there was alarm expressed from Scotland and Wales in particular in relation to these. It's worth noting in that white paper that on the protocol, when it came to that, it said, and I quote paragraph 29, the government's aim is to ensure this legislative underpinning operates on a full UK-wide basis, taking into account the obligations that apply under the Northern Ireland Protocol. It explicitly said that the white paper doesn't set out the government's approach to implementing the protocol. It referred then to the command paper issued in May, or on delivering unfettered access. And it noted that that Northern Ireland will continue to apply a subset of EU rules, and goods being placed for sale in Northern Ireland will have to comply with those EU rules. So the consequence of that is that goods entering Northern Ireland, including from Great Britain, will face some restrictions in that regard. They have to meet those EU standards. So when it came to the bill, it was much more comprehensive than had been anticipated. So yes, it includes market access commitments. These are broadly interpreted. I'll mention that in a minute. It covers services as well. It covers mutual recognition of qualifications. It has new roles for the Competition and Markets Authority, new functions in that regard. And it also gives the UK government regulatory powers over the use of subsidies, including being able to prevent the use of subsidies if it's seen as distorting the UK internal market. Fundamentally, and one thing that makes this bill quite different to what was anticipated and noted in the white paper is that it's essentially trying to legislate for unfettered access from Northern Ireland into Great Britain, thus meeting the commitment made in the New Decade New Approach document as well as elsewhere. So fundamentally, just to explain the two key principles, the principles behind market access commitment, that of mutual recognition and non-discrimination. These are given direct legal effect, or will be if this bill is passed. And they're really about new regulations or about amendments to existing ones rather than those that exist already. That's not too surprising because, of course, we don't have any problematic divergence to a great degree at the moment. So mutual recognition is basically saying that if a good is sold in one part of the territory, or indeed a service offered in one part of the territory, it should be legally provided in the other. This will apply to rules governing product requirements such as ingredients, packaging. It also allows for Northern Ireland's interest. It means that qualifying goods from Northern Ireland, and we have yet to see what that actually means. It's likely to be different according to different goods, that they will be able to be sold in Great Britain. The consequence of this is that it significantly limits the ability of the different parts of the UK, namely Scotland and Wales, to enforce their own economic and social preferences. Then the principle of non-discrimination, either direct or indiscrimination, based on differential treatment between local and incoming goods. And this is prohibited by this bill. And essentially, an upshot of all of this is that this might effectively render the autonomous decisions of the devolved legislatures redundant in practice because of the overwhelming size of the English market compared to elsewhere in the UK. So a key concern is what this bill lacks. It lacks safeguards, the definition of the scope of the rules, and the range of justifications for exemptions is actually quite tight. So when this bill is passed, the devolved legislatures will be blocked from passing legislation that may conflict with it. And there are several consequences of this. Primarily, the issue is that it doesn't prevent a race to the bottom, if you like. So there's a potential for significant deregulatory pressures within GB. And the reason this is important for us in Northern Ireland, for businesses in Northern Ireland, is concern about, say, Northern Ireland goods continuing to be produced to EU standards. These tend to be more costly and therefore facing indirect competition when they're entering the market in GB. There's also concerns about there being a very limited set of exemptions, much more limited than are allowed in the EU single market, for example. And there are no guarantees of the UK internal market system operating to certain minimum consumer standards or with protections in such areas as environment and consumer protection. Another concern is around the ability of the Secretary of State for BEIS to be able to amend the restrictions on statutory requirements, and in principle there may be a requirement to consult with the devolved governments but not to seek their consent. And another concern is about the amendment of the Devolution Acts in order to add reserved powers, so effectively giving the UK government power to regulate subsidies. This power, formerly held by the EU for GB, and in certain respects it'll be still held by the EU with regards to Northern Ireland and trade covered by the protocol. And then finally, there's no mechanism for intergovernmental relations to manage the internal market. The monitoring authority of the CMA is accountable to Parliament, but the representation of devolved governments' interests on this is obviously very limited. So on to the controversial, or the piece of the bill that was unexpected and that has generated a lot of controversy, I think it's fair to say, are those dimensions relating to the Northern Ireland Protocol. These are essentially clauses 40 to 45. Clause 40 is about Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market and customs territory. And although essentially an upshot of this is to allow for the full functioning of the protocol, but the language is notably vague. So authorities implementing the protocol are to have special regard to Northern Ireland's integral place in the internal market, its place in the UK customs territory, and also the need to facilitate the free flow of goods between Britain and Northern Ireland. The clause 41 is about unfettered access to UK internal market for Northern Ireland goods. And in some ways, this clause really does, it says it doesn't necessarily prevent a check if it's necessary to secure compliance with an international obligation. But then, of course, we have clause 42. And as you'll be aware, the principle of unfettered access has been interpreted, particularly by the UK government, as meaning that there should be no paperwork whatsoever on goods from Northern Ireland entering GB. And as the UK government has acknowledged in the command paper and elsewhere, officially the EU would expect there to be at least exit summary declarations on goods leaving Northern Ireland. This was a point of negotiation and discussion in the Joint Committee. And the explanatory notes accompanying this bill say that the UK is discussing the disapplication of this requirement. However, Clause 41 of this bill would provide a power to disapply or modify this requirement. Clause 43 is about Article 10 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is about state aid. So it allows that. So Article 10 allows that EU state aid rules will apply in relation to trade and electricity, and covers all trade relating to Northern Ireland as is covered by the protocol. It's worth reminding ourselves that it doesn't actually ban state aid, but if the state aid reaches a certain threshold, it does fall within the scope of EU supervision. Notification should be given to the Commission, and then a decision is made as to whether it's acceptable or not, whether it poses a threat to the EU single market. So the bill under this clause will give the powers to the Secretary of State to make regulations setting out how he or she considers this article to be interpreted. And it's only in the powers of the Secretary of State to do that. That's according to 44. And then on 45, basically on those two sections 43 and 42 around unfettered access and state aid, they are to have effect notwithstanding any relevant international or domestic law with which they may be incompatible. Now, I was watching the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland giving evidence to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee earlier, and he repeated his statement that these provisions are really an insurance policy. They're a safety net in the event of a no deal or no agreement at the Joint Committee level. However, there is nothing in this bill to indicate that. It's not having that as a particular clause or condition for this to come into effect. So where this leaves us, within the UK, we see that those issues around devolution and devolved powers have been greeted with alarm in Scotland and in Wales. It's been described as a full frontal assault on devolution. And it is worth bearing in mind that these powers do cover services and mutual recognition of qualifications, not just goods. It's been long assumed that there will not be granting of legislative consent from the Scottish and Welsh parliaments on this. The consequences with the UK-EU relationship are just as severe, if not more severe. So there is, as we've seen from the letter from Aris Sefcovic, who's the co-chair with Michael Gove of the Joint Committee, calling on the UK to pull back on these plans and to do so clearly by the end of the month. There is no indication of that happening as yet. We have yet to see what's going to happen in Parliament about any amendments to this bill, but it is pretty clear that the intention is for the government to give themselves these powers. And fundamentally, we see, therefore, a significant increase in the likelihood of a no deal between the UK and the EU, which inevitably means negative consequences for Northern Ireland. And what that means for the implementation of the protocol and the wider stability of the political scene here is sort of really yet to be discussed. We may talk about that in the questions. Thank you.
Katy, thank you very much for that. You have addressed many of, I suppose, some of the questions that I would have had around it, and I would just pick up initially on what you've said there about the Scottish and Welsh government's responses, describing it as a full frontal assault and devolution. because contrary to that, we've had very provocative claims from British ministers that this is supposed to be, to protect the Good Friday Agreement, when in fact it undermines all three strands of the Good Friday Agreement, as outlined there in relation to what it does for devolution, not being able to pass legislation that conflicts, removing some of those powers to Westminster, but it also undermines North-South cooperation and coordination, particularly in relation to EU matters and other areas of cooperation, and obviously it ignores the obligation for the British and Irish governments to use best endeavours to reach agreement on areas of cooperation and mutual interest. So I guess, what would you say in response to that?
So, I mean, it's quite clear that, and again, reflecting what the Secretary of State has been saying, there is the justification for it in some ways has been about meeting the interests of Northern Ireland's economy and giving certainty to businesses. And there has been considerable mention of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. I think the key question is, will the protocol be implemented? And will it be implemented effectively or not? A lot depends on that. I mean, we should be clear that the effects of this bill as it relates to the protocol are quite limited. So we could have expected that the EU may well have given way on the issue of exit summary declarations, because one might argue actually the negative impact of that could be for the UK, as there are consequences therefore of it knowing what's circulating within its own market. So that the EU may well have conceded on that. And the issue of state aid, again, I think that's, the protocol isn't wholly undermined by what powers could potentially be given to the UK government under this bill. So so if the protocol continues to stand and to be in effect, then there are considerable reassurances for Northern Ireland vis-a-vis free movement of goods across the single market, and indeed on North-South cooperation. Article 11, for example, covers quite a lot in that regard. So I'd be cautious about saying that it challenges or undermines the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, because so much protection of that comes through the protocol.
And in relation there to your point that you make about the implementation of the protocol without a free trade agreement, how difficult is that, and where it clashes directly with what is being proposed in this internal market bill?
Yeah, so I mean, it seems a little crass to say, but it's fundamentally true. If we have a breakdown in the UK-EU relationship, which I should reiterate, the UK and the EU are saying that they don't want that. But if that is the case, if the UK is really not prepared to move on this at all, and the EU is not prepared to move, and we have a breakdown and then we have a no deal, the biggest challenge will be the lack of trust. I mean, complete lack of trust in that relationship. And this will be a worry with regards to the protocol, because the protocol is a risk for both the UK and the EU in many regards. Fundamentally, for the EU, it's a bit of an act of faith, because they are trusting that the UK authorities will be implementing the protocol, implementing those necessary checks and controls on goods entering Northern Ireland from GB and elsewhere. So and similarly too, as we know, the UK government has been seeking some negotiations with the EU in relation to the full force of the protocol and what it means, most particularly on restrictions on goods entering Northern Ireland. So if you have a situation where there is a lack of trust in that relationship, then we do have a consequence of pressure and increased suspicion around what might be happening for Northern Ireland. And it's not just political, of course. There are all sorts of knock-on effects with regards to how people view Northern Ireland and the reputation of goods from Northern Ireland within the single market and elsewhere. The consequences of a no deal for here would be very severe. Even if we did have a situation where the protocol was being properly implemented, I mean, then you just have the range of goods at risk and with tariffs needing to be applied on them, at least in principle, entering Northern Ireland from GB. I mean, that would go up considerably, and the scope of the protocol and the impact of the protocol would be felt all the more in the event of a no deal. And that's one reason why it would be a negative outcome for Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and just then, and you mentioned, about this bill, potentially helping businesses within that particular market. Obviously, businesses have argued for the protocol. They are supportive of it and the protections provided by it. Is it a bit of a contradiction then that we have this bill which is undermining trust between the British government and the EU and the chances of getting a free trade agreement that is going to protect businesses and allow a smoother implementation of the protocol? Is that a contradiction in terms between, bringing forward this legislation to protect businesses, but at the same time completely undermining that negotiation?
I mean, so businesses have been wanting certainty for some time, and I know in response to the consultation that was issued on the white paper, businesses here, and I'm not speaking for everyone by any means, but I think the general sense of it was it would be good to be clear or to have reassurances that Northern Ireland goods would not be discriminated against in GB and that there would be market access from Northern Ireland into GB, even if there were constraints in the other direction. And so this would be the principle behind some of this bill, right? That it would be attempting to give certainty and assurances in that regard. Now, the scope of it, as I say, is considerable, and there are concerns around that which we may discuss in more detail. But fundamentally, that is something that businesses have asked for. I think it's worth noting that a lot of the controversy, the principle of unfettered access, it was a concern. But there are many other issues for Northern Ireland business that we're looking for certainty on around the implementation of the protocol, around what qualifying status is, for example. I mean, very technical, detailed things around labelling, etc. That's what businesses are wanting certainty from. So, I mean, that is. This goes, in some ways, this could be said to be going some way towards giving certainty in a very specific area, but a knock-on effect of this attempt to take powers to disapply parts of the protocol is raising uncertainty in the whole environment within which we're having to prepare for the end of the transition period.
And just one final one from me before I hand over to some other members for questions. Article 2 of the protocol commits to no diminution of rights. And I guess just given some of the statements that there were in the British media over the weekend around the intent in relation to disapplying ECHR, looking again at the Human Rights Act, are there concerns there that we may be looking at other areas of the protocol that potentially could be under threat?
Well, again, this is why the protocol is seen as important. is that it doesn't just obviously cover trade, it is around key issues around human rights and North-South, etc. So if you're looking at the progress that's been made in on those kind of matters, and I'm not an expert in that area, I know there's many outstanding concerns, but fundamentally there are indications of trying to protect human rights and to follow on from the commitments made in the protocol, and there has been some progress on that, albeit not quite adequate as yet. But again, it all depends on the full implementation of the protocol, and the government is repeating that it intends to implement the protocol, and you see other signs of this in the Trader Support Service, etc. So I wouldn't want to be too. I want to be careful about giving the impression that the protocol itself is under threat. But I would say if it is, then we're in a very dangerous situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Sinead, can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Can we bring Sinead? Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Katy, for that briefing this morning. I suppose I believe that every single member of the Legislative Assembly should be concerned about this bill, because it is really a power grab. And Scotland and Wales have kicked up a fuss about it, and the Northern Ireland Executive seems to be sitting back waiting on things to happen to us, rather than actually being proactive and preventing this bill going forward. One of the things that I would like to say, because there's an awful lot of bombastic statements been made by the Tory government, but can you finally say once and for all, does the withdrawal agreement threaten food supplies into Northern Ireland? And then also, I want to kind of ask your opinion about within the UK, the internal market bill, does it offer unfettered access from GB for Northern Ireland goods if there's no agreement on the critical route, because via Dublin, because about 50% of our food produced here in Northern Ireland actually goes into the GB market via Dublin, and I'm concerned about that in relation to the internal marketing bill as well.
Okay. So your first question is about the purported threat of the EU blockading food supplies into Northern Ireland. So essentially, that isn't a threat for three main reasons. One is that it's the UK authorities who are implementing the protocol. The second is that the whole issue has arisen from the fact that the EU hasn't yet given the UK third country listing with regards to SPS and unrelated products entering the EU, including Northern Ireland. But that's really because they're waiting on the UK to state the standards that will be being met and the way that those standards will be conformed with. So it's just waiting for the necessary information from the UK on that. And it may well have mentioned that to the UK in the negotiations. I don't know. It's not the same as a blockade, and the EU has already a couple of times listed the UK for that when there was concerns about a no deal outcome. So the UK still needs to be listed, but it needs to provide the information to do that. And then the third point is that in the protocol, Article 16 does have safeguards in such eventuality that either side actually can act unilaterally to avoid such dire situation. So the threat of a blockade is really non-existent. The issue around unfettered access, so you're picking up a really important point. So even if you're looking in detail at how unfettered access is defined, what we've seen even in the command paper and elsewhere is that the UK government has really been focusing on direct access from NI into GB. And you can understand that to some degree. What it hasn't been yet promising is unfettered access via other routes, specifically Dublin. And that's because, of course, then you have another port involved and you have another authority. So for full unfettered access, you'd have to have the Irish, with the permission of the EU, waiving paperwork, whatever, waiving export declarations for goods from Northern Ireland going into GB. That would be a huge ask. The UK government could act unilaterally and say, for Northern Ireland goods entering Holyhead, for example, we won't be requiring import declarations. We haven't yet seen that, and this bill doesn't go as far as to specify that or particularly to allow it. So I wouldn't be reassured that unfettered access via indirect routes is guaranteed at all by this bill.
And just one quick question as well. What issues does the state aid decision by the UK present and the delivery of the protocol agreement and the future relationship? What do you see as the challenges there?
So, I mean, we know that the state aid has been a huge point of contention between the UK and the EU. So this is, if you like, is the real crux of the matter, because this is something that goes beyond Northern Ireland Protocol to being about the UK-EU future relationship. This provision in the bill recognises the fact that there could potentially be a reach into GB as a consequence of this protocol, and it would be basically that state aid rules of the EU would affect GB-based businesses if they have some, if they're operating in Northern Ireland, or it affects trade as it relates to Northern Ireland. And clearly the UK government is wanting to prevent that, and it explicitly says that in the bill, that it relates to beyond Northern Ireland. The consequences, it's possible to see it as a real negotiating tack, in that the UK government wanted to say, well, even just to sort of up the ante a wee bit, to say, well, we can take matters into our own hands on this regard, and to try and change the dynamics of what was being negotiated and the standoff that was happening at the UK-EU level. It's clearly hasn't worked. If that was the intention, it hasn't worked the way they expected it to. And really, as you say, a big point then is about the trust between them, because it really suggests that even the agreement that was negotiated between them is now in doubt. So the consequences of that, you can see the rationale perhaps behind that approach, but the consequences of it are far-reaching and go way beyond the protocol. Yeah.
Okay, a lot for us to be worried about. Thank you very much again, Katy, for your briefing this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. John?
Thank you, Katy. Another very interesting presentation this morning. I don't know if you managed to hear the presentation previous to your own in terms of the state of the economy and the likely state of it right up to 2024. The uncertainty around this obviously adds to our economic worries. Why use a hammer to crack a nut, in the sense of this could have been worked out in the joint committee in terms of negotiations? But what's the strategy here? What's the British government trying to achieve through this strategy, do you think? It might be an unfair question to you in terms of academic, but just in terms of an opinion maybe.
To be fair, they never asked me for a strategy in relation to any of this. So I think, so the government would say, so as I say, the Secretary of State is saying it's a safety net. So just in case you don't have an agreement at the Joint Committee level on unfettered access in particular, about the need for exit summary declarations, then those can still be disapplied or waived by the UK government. And they would say, they're saying that that's in order to give businesses certainty that at least in that direction, we can be sure that there won't be any paperwork needed on entering GB directly. When it comes to a strategy, though, I don't know. It's just too easy to speculate and to sort of wonder what on earth is going on. But I do think because of the state aid being included in this bill, very particularly, and the fact that that's the main way in which the Northern Ireland Protocol affects GB, I do think that it's there's no coincidence that this is the one that's really been that they are enabling themselves to act in a way that's incompatible and inconsistent with domestic and international law. It's in order to take back that power to themselves on that regard, and in some ways to kind of draw a clear blue line between what's applying in Northern Ireland and what should apply in GB.
But is it not the case that in terms of trade talks, and Britain will enter trade talks, they hope, around the world, there's speculation at the one with Japan at the minute, the state aid rules within those negotiations or that agreement are actually stricter than those in which the EU are seeking? It's not a case where any nation is going to enter trade with Britain and allow unfair advantage to traders in Britain against their own companies.
Yes, so state aid is it was always going to be a big issue in these future relationship negotiations, and because of the need for a level playing field in that regard and to avoid distorting competition, to maintain that the EU's internal market, we can see why state aid is included, with some exceptions in the protocol. And one upshot of all of this is that the UK, if we're going to have progress being made in the UK-EU talks, in a funny way, it's actually, looking at what's coming out from Brussels and elsewhere, it's actually just made the issue that much harder. So whereas the EU was wanting certain things from the UK, mainly reassurances around independent regulator in this regard, it's going to be even more hardline in what it's wanting to see before it's prepared to have an agreement on that matter. And this is one reason why, regardless of the intentions behind this move, and as I say, we can only speculate on that, the outcome of it is increasing the likelihood of a no deal.
Okay. The powers that are bestowed on the Secretary of State as a result of this bill, one, who holds them to account, him or her in the future? I understand there may not be recourse to judicial review around some of the decisions, which strikes me that we end up with somebody with significant power. This image in my head of an old colonial governor sitting in the big house on the hill looking down on his subjects, directing their operations, which devalues completely, in my opinion, the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement and the power sharing institution I'm currently sitting in. But so I suppose my main trust, who holds the Secretary of State to account?
Well, this is a concern around quite a number of matters in relation to this bill, and indeed other matters around secondary legislation and the powers that ministers have as a consequence of the handling of the repatriation of powers from Brussels. And obviously this concern has been raised by the devolved legislatures in many regards. So in principle, these powers are in the hands of the ministers, and as to the holding to account, they have those powers. Now the CMA and the monitoring authority for the UK internal market, the new functions that it will have, that will be reviewing the operation of the UK internal market every few years or so. So that could be a point at which concerns are really brought to the fore. But that's as much as I can say. I might be missing something very obvious, but I can't. That's the answer to give at the moment.
Well, I suspect you haven't missed something obvious because it's not your style to be missing the detail of these things. But this is an area of concern, obviously, as a local elected representative in a locally elected institution, that one, we can't hold them to account, and it would appear that no one can hold them to account, him or her in the future, to account in relation to which is such an important matter. But thank you for your contribution.
Katy, just in relation to the claims that it's an insurance policy by putting it in place, the deadline that they've attached to it of the 15th of October is the 15th of October is a very tight turnaround. Is that deliberate, do you think, to try and force the pace of negotiation?
So, I mean, there's a huge amount of legislation needs to be passed to give us relative clarity about what's going to happen after the end of transition. This isn't just in relation to this bill. The EU has set the deadline of the end of September to get for the UK government to do an about turn on this particular matter. And that's really because of the timetable that the UK-EU is facing. So the next European Council is around that time, the middle of October. And as you know, that had been the point at which we'd all anticipated that would be the council at which the final UK-EU deal would be signed off. That's not going to happen now. And so, at least in one area of domestic legislation, albeit one that is contested and obviously, and will not have the consent of at least Scotland and Wales, that if this is in UK-wide legislation, at that point it will give certainty in some regards, albeit a type of certainty that raises great concerns from many quarters.
Thank you. Gary, can we bring Gary into the spotlight, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Katy, for your presentation and sharing your views today. It's very much appreciated. I suppose two questions. I'll ask the first question and then let you respond, and then I'll ask the second question. The first question, I suppose, like yourself, I've been following the conversations from the Secretary of State at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee this morning, whilst, of course, engaging on the very interesting conversations that we've had in our own committee. Brandon Lewis had indicated that the UK government have been very clear that they do not want to see, and they will not return to a customs border on the island of Ireland. That's what he said. Now, that's for others to interpret how that can be done. Obviously, from a unionist perspective, there has been a lot of concern around the idea of a border in the Irish Sea. There's been a lot of I suppose, emphasis placed on the fact that the Good Friday Agreement should be adhered to, and that a border in the island of Ireland would breach that. What is your view in terms of the internal border within the United Kingdom, the border in the Irish Sea, and do you feel that would breach the Good Friday Agreement?
Certainly there have been concerns expressed about an Irish Sea border, to use that, it's not a great phrase, but to use that phrase. And that's not just from unionists, that's from businesses as well, and indeed from consumers. The greater restrictions that we have, the more cost involved in goods coming into NI from GB, the worse it is for the economy. That's just a fact. And I think another fact is the more the UK diverges from the EU, the greater the challenges for NI. And a consequence of the protocol, as it was written and as agreed by Johnson, is that, you know, the full force of that divergence in effect comes into play in the Irish Sea. And as was pointed out in the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee this morning, you know, at the time Johnson was absolutely clear that that didn't breach the Good Friday Belfast Agreement and was entirely in accordance with it. And in and of itself, it doesn't necessarily breach the agreement, but I think that there's the question of what it actually means in practice. And this goes back to it's rather unsatisfactorily sort of vague, but it is absolutely true that if you have a breakdown if you have a no deal, first and foremost, and therefore the requirements on restrictions on goods coming into NI from GB will be that much greater. And then if you have a breakdown in trust around it, whereby you know, this is what we're going through now is just a small indication of what may happen after the end of transition, then we're in a very dire situation, which does lead to instability, not just, of course, in the UK-EU relationship, but in the British-Irish relationship, and therefore putting the whole context for the 1998 agreement under pressure.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, and I suppose I mentioned, you know, you're absolutely right. Businesses are very concerned about that as well. And I think we can all agree that the lack of certainty isn't good. So, you know, we can all agree on that. And I think that the sooner that businesses can get clarity, that's better for us all. I suppose to move on to my next question, and it's to follow on from Sinead's point around the alleged food or potential food blockade in terms of Northern Ireland. You'll be aware of David Frost, the UK Chief Negotiator's position in respect of those conversations with the EU. He did say that the EU's position is that listing is needed for Great Britain only, not Northern Ireland. So if GB were not listed, it would be automatically illegal for Northern Ireland to import food products from GB. Do you think that, you know, David Frost is not telling the truth, or, you know, is he overstating the reality of the situation?
It's the use of the word blockade wasn't helpful. I think it's true that if GB goods don't meet the standards and aren't listed as compliant, indeed, goods from anywhere aren't meeting those EU standards, then it'd be prohibited from entering Northern Ireland, right? And in such a situation whereby the UK doesn't produce the necessary information, which it would be producing in, you know, this is what the UK would have insisted on it when it was in the EU. You know, it's a standard thing. It's not a big, you know, it's not controversial. There's a logic and a reason for it. But anyway, if that's not produced, so the EU can't list the UK in that regard, then yeah, there will be difficulty in principle in those goods entering Northern Ireland. But this is why I mentioned that safeguard in the protocol, which is basically this is the Article 16. If the application of this protocol leads to serious economic, societal, or environmental difficulties that are liable to persist, or to diversion of trade, the Union or the UK may unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures. And there's also all those opportunities for negotiation, arbitration, etc., around the implementation of the protocol. So at no point was there, has there been a risk of that kind of scenario whereby we're all starving? You know, it was never really on the cards. But the key point does stand, though, that Northern Ireland, the consequence of the protocol is that Northern Ireland is following those EU standards, and those are the standards of goods entering Northern Ireland.
Okay, Katy, look, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks.
Katy, thank you very much.
Can I just ask one more
Yeah,
question?
go ahead, John.
Katy, just on that last point, has the EU ever placed a food blockade on any nation?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't. I think it's no.
Katy, thank you very much. It was really, really useful, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning. And I'm sure we'll be all watching with interest as this plays out in great detail over the next few weeks. And maybe you will come back and enlighten us some more at a future date. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on then to our next briefing, which is from Excluded NI on the impact of COVID-19 and the access to support. There is a clerk's memo at page 348 of your pack, an overview of Excluded NI, or Excluded UK, sorry, at page 351. There's a further item of correspondence from Excluded NI at page 82 of your table papers regarding the Finance Minister's willingness to provide financial support. So I'd like to welcome to our meeting Brian Donaldson, who is the spokesperson for Excluded NI. And Brian, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you get me?
Yeah, we can indeed. So if I hand over to you to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members for questions.
Super. Thank you very much for having us on today. The key for us as a group is really to put forward what we can do for economic growth going forward. Northern Ireland is classed as a micro enterprise economy, with 94% of businesses employing less than 10 people, and 72% of that do not employ anybody. Those businesses make up 20% of the jobs within the private sector, and that equates to 11% of the turnover. So the importance of our group of micro enterprises is key going forward. The stats around it are quite big in the sense that there's 134,000 self-employed people in Northern Ireland. We do work within all sectors and support all sectors within the economy. The biggest occupation within the self-employed is skilled trades and directors, which through today's meeting we've heard about reskilling and skilling people, when we have quite a lot of skilled people within our department or within our sector. So it brings us on to the schemes that were launched, and those schemes were massive and they were important to the economy, something that we're a part of, and we're grateful for what has been done to date. And it's been quite reactive. So the job retention scheme was launched first, and then obviously SEISS came after that as a reaction to the amount of people that missed out on the job retention scheme. So it's been positive to see that there has been reaction to schemes that haven't reached everybody. So the SEIS in Northern Ireland had the biggest take-up of the UK regions, with 78,000 people out of 98,000 eligible took the scheme up, which was 81%. But where we failed in that was that 38% were unable to reach that SEISS support. And while other devolved regions had seen their percentages in around 31, 32%, they then reacted to that and brought about additional support measures. The fact that we had the highest amount that were unable to access the support and haven't really reacted very quickly to that is alarming for us. So what we add to the economy can be huge going forward. If you take, for instance, B&Bs, they can drive anywhere up to £250,000 into tourism. And I know there's a lot of talk at the minute about supporting tourism, and we can do that, but B&Bs have been left out of that support, and we need people like NITA, Hospitality Ulster, Tourism NI to really start looking towards supporting those people and certainly putting proposals to the Minister. I had a meeting with the Minister last week, and I thank Stuart for bringing that meeting along with Andrew Maher. And it was productive, and things that we did talk about were the endless funding that we don't have but we are seen to spend money in areas that the £4 million for tourism I brought up with the Minister, and the key for me in that was the £4 million marketing. We could have spent that within the self-employed sector. The biggest marketing that we have for SMEs is word of mouth. The reason why I personally made the jump from PAYE to tourism or to self-employed was word of mouth. I spoke to somebody that was in my position and made that move. So we have 30,000 people potentially excluded. And if we're talking about growing and getting new business, it doesn't matter what scheme is launched or what 3-word logo that we invest money in. People will go to somebody else that has made the move for that advice. And at the minute, we've got 30,000 people that aren't overly pleased with the move they've made and the support that's came from that. So instead of spending £4 million in marketing, we could have spent that money in the self-employed sector, and that's free marketing after that, because my advice was, from somebody that made the move, was to go for it. It's great. Family life's better, the money's good, and you have a real sense of purpose. Whereas now, the 30,000 people that will be given the advice going forward won't have that same opinion. And it doesn't matter how much we spend on marketing, it won't matter, because the opinion that we haven't been helped, and we go back to Mike Brennan's comments that some businesses just aren't worth saving, that will be detrimental going forward for economic growth. And that's what's key is, and I spoke to the Minister and I said, we are key to economic growth. And to take John O'Dowd's sort of comments, that we need to hold what we have and build from there. And that does bring us into the market and the free marketing that we can bring and advise businesses to make the leap from PAYE and help boost the economy. Going forward, I think what we have now, sorry, just catch my notes here. You can break them down into groups as well. I think Kiva mentioned it yesterday, the newly self-employed. So we can tailor packages, and the Minister has shown that she can tailor packages when it suits. So the £5 million equity loan that was launched, it's tailored to a 6% market, because 94% of businesses in Northern Ireland don't meet that criteria. So they have the information there that they can tailor packages, and the money is available. I don't accept the comments that we had yesterday that we can't help everybody, but we certainly can't accept that there's money there and we're going to help nobody. It has to start coming forward now with tailored packages driven by the economy, because we will drive the economy as we grow and survive through these very difficult times for a lot of people. And it's not just the business side too. I suppose it's the mental health side that's really sort of shining a light now on how people feel valued by the government. With obviously no support coming, they can't feel very valued, and without that value, it's hard to have a progressive growth. I know myself from being in many teams that to flourish and grow in any aspect of business, you really need everybody on board. So we've got to feel that value coming from, first of all, who's the Economy Minister to put bids in. That's key. Without the bids, we don't have a chance. And we've heard that it's maybe not the Economy Minister's remit to bid for us, but I would disagree with that in the sense that we are a driving force behind the economy. And as you heard from the numbers at the start, the micro enterprise economy is what we are, and we are the epitome of the Northern Ireland economy. So we do fall into the Economy Minister's remit. It's not just tourism and hospitality. They have received massive support, which helps me too in my line of work, because I work within the hospitality. So again, thanks to the Minister for doing that. But I'll sort of finish up in what I want to say. with all the support that came, we appreciate that we were unintentionally excluded because it needed a blanket support. The blanket support came and that helped many people. And then the second round of help came, and again it was more of a blanket support and a reaction. And again, we feel we were unintentionally excluded. But now when we're coming around to the third and fourth tranches of support, and this has been highlighted by, I suppose, every MLA, that we're now running the risk of becoming intentionally excluded, and that can't happen, not in this day and age. And certainly we're looking into that on other lines, but the support has been great. But getting the additional support to the people that need it has proved very difficult and a slow process. And I think when you have, I've probably made mistakes in this crash course that I've had in Northern Ireland politics. You have public sector meets private sector, and we do have a different drive behind us in the sense that we just get stuff done. And that's something the economy should be proud of, and certainly the economy minister should be supporting and getting well behind us. But I think I'll leave it at that now and open it to the members.
And Brian, thank you very much for that. And it is useful to hear from yourself representing the wider group firsthand. Obviously, you will be aware that as a committee we have been highlighting the groups that have been excluded for many months, and the need to try and get that, as you described it, tailored approach to support. That's something that we have been advocating for, feel very much could be done and should be done. As you mentioned yourself, there is information available to the department that would enable those schemes to be set up and to be directed. And as you outlined there, you know, this is about businesses and entrepreneurs that are the backbone of our economy, and people who have been encouraged to take that leap, to become self-employed, to set up a business. And you know, if we are looking to instill that confidence into people in the future, well then we do need to see that support coming for people now in these difficult times. We've heard before, you know, the types of schemes, and we've seen the comparisons with Scotland. I you know, for the newly self-employed, I think that there is still opportunities to look to put in place supports like that. And I you know, we've some groups have now been taken care of, but there are still those that are missing out. The newly self-employed, could you want to maybe talk us through where you see the gaps remaining?
Well, yeah, no, what we met with the minister, and we constantly heard the word difficulties around things, but I think the minister's paid to do difficult jobs, and that's why she's in that role. So even simple suggestions that we made in the meeting for newly self-employed really seemed to be new news or something that nobody had ever thought about. But the support can be made very easily with a unique taxpayer reference number. So I can take a unique taxpayer reference number from the taxman and give it to my accountant, and my accountant can access my tax therefore to verify many things. So the Department of Economy can do this. Let's not forget there's 1,000 people in the Department of Economy. There's plenty of staff there to administer these sort of things. So I guess that's our frustration, is that there is no thinking outside the box. It's too difficult, and they're just failing us in that sense, that they're not working hard enough. In fact, I was told during the meeting that I should applaud some people in the Department of Economy for working late on a Friday and a Saturday night once to try and make one support scheme. To be honest, I think they should be working a lot harder for the micro enterprise economy that we have constantly. But that's one group. The limited company directors as well missed out, and they employ people, they drive people to better themselves, and they are a niche market, and they do advocate business growth in Northern Ireland. I think our taxi drivers, Coach and Hollier, have eventually been sorted out and given a direction, and it's taken far too long to do that. Childcare are in the group as well. They did receive some form of support, but from what I read into it, it was for the individual childcare provider was the guts of £300 for staying open and supporting NHS staff to go to work and keep us safe. And I think the package that they were offered was a joke. But we need the executive, as they have done with the infrastructure minister, and came down and said, sort this package out. Whether that was right or wrong, it's not up for me, but it was a positive. Does the economy minister really need to be told that she needs to sort the economy out? Maybe that's where we're at.
Thanks for that, Brian. And I suppose just an additional point to make is we are still, through the Finance Minister and ourselves, in communication with the Treasury around the widening of the self-employed income support scheme to also take into account some of those groups that have been missed out, and we will continue to highlight that aspect of things as well. John Stewart, can I bring you into the spotlight, please?
Yeah, that's me, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, hi Brian. You can't see me, but hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for your presentation today, and thank you for the lobbying and the passionate way you have represented the many thousands of businesses and self-employed people across Northern Ireland who, as you know, have been unable to avail of any support to date. Hopefully you will know that a number of us have been in your corner and fighting these battles since back in April. And if you watched the debate yesterday and the motion I brought to the Assembly, and I know you did, you will see the path that we've been on to try and secure that support. I think it was deeply regrettable whenever that hardship grant that we thought would probably be able to tie up a lot of the loose ends for those particularly affected, ruled in, then ruled out, then ruled in, then ruled out again, yourself and many others. And that was deeply regrettable and a real kick in the teeth. And I genuinely thought whenever we heard them back in June and July that it was going to be clear that there was going to be a massive underspend in the grant scheme, that could be instantly repackaged into something looking like a secondary hardship fund for the excluded business community. That money had all but been spent in that it had already been allocated to grant support in different guises, albeit, and it would have been the perfect starting point. And a significant sum of almost 60 million, as you know. And that is what we've been pushing for, and I think that's what we need to continue to push for. I don't accept the point that we even need the raw data from HMRC, although it can probably be got if they really did lobby for it. I think, as you'll know, Brian, and probably agree, there are a lot of businesses and self-employed people and small micro businesses that have done quite well during the lockdown and aren't in difficulties, but there are others who are earnest in their will to survive, but through no fault of their own cannot trade or can't trade in the circumstances that they used to be able to trade. And is that hardship that needs to be identified and then supported through this pandemic. And that can be done because the £25,000 grant was predicated upon hardship, and the hardship grant was predicated upon hardship. So that can be done as well, and that can be done quite quickly while that data needs to be sought. It wasn't really more of a question, but it was just more of a statement, but I'm sure, hopefully you'll agree with that. And do you agree that, it's not every business out there, because a lot of people are trying to price this out of the equation with ridiculous figures. That is not the fact. It's not every micro business that is needing this, but the ones that do need it now.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for your motion yesterday, and again to I'm pretty sure arousing support from everybody about the plates that we have. It isn't every business that needs this, and I suppose the numbers do look scary whenever you sort of look at maybe 30,000 people that are technically excluded, but not all need the help. But certainly some do, And I just think the inactivity, if the same inactivity happened in the private sector, we would have no economy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think, that's the frustrating thing for us looking in towards Stormont, is the inactivity just, it takes me away sometimes. And I hope that we have more progressive actions coming from the Minister over the next few weeks. I do know through some people that they're scrambling around to try and get figures. I was probably disappointed when I came to the meeting and presented figures that not one figure was questioned, which will go in line with what John O'Dowd had said yesterday, that the decision was a no a long time ago. They just haven't came forward with that. So I think there is a change in the sea, and help may be on the way, but certainly not at the pace we would expect it to come from if it was in the private sector.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So I don't want to take up too much more time because I know there's other members wanting to get in. But I think, sadly, I do agree with you. I think that decision has been taken a long time ago strategically, and that was clearly evidenced by the leadership of the department through the Permanent Secretary's comments 2 or 3 weeks ago to this committee, which were deeply regrettable. And again, another real kick in the teeth to businesses that have not been able to avail to date. I think that is deeply, deeply frustrating. But hopefully yesterday's motion did send a strong message to the Minister. It was unanimous support from across the House, and as you say, so many members spoke with so much passion about the businesses in their constituency that they represent, and we all know them. I was one. I started off as a self-employed business person. I know the lengths you have to go to. You don't want handouts. You often that's not why you become self-employed. You certainly don't do it for the money most of the time, because if you did, you'd be on less than minimum wage. But in terms of the hours you're working, but I think whenever things do get difficult, there is a requirement to identify that and to support it. And it is deeply regrettable that we haven't seen something to date, but hopefully that message resonated with the Minister yesterday. And I honestly cannot see any reason why a bid cannot be put to the Finance Minister via the Department of Economy. What possible rationale there is not to submit that and then put the ball firmly into the court of other executive ministers. And as I said yesterday, then the pressure can come to mount on them to see if that money can be provided. As I say, we do not need the raw data. Something can be concocted quite quickly. And I hope through your lobbying and through the sustained pressure from this committee and others that we do see that come very soon. But thanks, Brian. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, John.
John, Stuart.
Thank you. Ryan, good afternoon. Thank you for coming with me last week to meet the Minister, and as John Stewart has just said, the information that you provided to us assisted us in shaping the debate yesterday. I think, having met with the Minister and having had the Minister in the Assembly chamber yesterday taking part in the debate, she really needs to appreciate that this issue is not going to go away, and it's not going to go away for a whole range of very important reasons. No political party would want to be left being blamed for the deliberate closure of businesses, and that's the situation that we're in. People can blame COVID, people can blame Brexit, they can blame the downturn in the economy for businesses rising and falling, but no politician wants to take the blame themselves for being responsible for businesses closing. And that is the sum effect of the failure of this Minister to be sufficiently innovative to devise appropriate schemes. And John Stewart also raised the point in his last contribution about the incredible myth that this is some homogeneous group of people that are all demanding the same amount of money. Nothing could be further from the truth. So I'm glad to hear, because I know you've told me and you've repeated it again today, that there now seem to be some moves in the department to try and assess the extent of the issue by trying to work out what the numbers are. And my question to you, and I probably do know the answer to this, is will your group work extensively with the department to provide them with the figures that they need, to break yourselves down into small groups, into small bites, and to make proposals for several hundred people who might only need X amount of pounds and a few thousand people that might need Y amount of pounds, or indeed not just direct payments like that, but it might be preferential access to training, IT or other resources that are clearly going to be coming forward and rolling forward in the next few months.
Yeah, no, I said to the Minister last week, we were probably aggressive in our lobbying to get where we needed to be, but as a new group, we probably had to do that to bring the light that I felt that the group deserved and needed. And I think one point I've noticed from the group, and again, it's probably because it comes from the private sector and self-employed and that attitude of must get done, I have to say that there is nothing that gets in the way of achieving what we want to achieve. There's no green or orange in the group. There's no age in the group. There's no sex in the group. We're all business people. And I think that's testament to where Northern Ireland's travelling as a country or as a nation. That those old ties that seem to be tying things up are dying out in the private sector. And it's really good to see that the arguments and the conversations that we have in the group are solely around economic growth. And when the economy grows, our pockets grow, our lives become better. And the quality of jobs, I think that the two guys that brought at the start that spoke very well, that was the quality of the jobs that we have in this sector are fantastic, and the people that are attached to it really are a pleasure to work with.
Brian, thank you very much for the work that you've been doing, and I think you will know that the commitment is here to continue to press this issue until we get a resolution of it. We are not going to go away.
Thank you, Stuart.
Can we bring Claire into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just first, I don't believe it is a registered interest as such, but I just, for the sake of transparency, I just wanted to make people aware that Brian would have a connection to a member of my staff. This is actually the first time I've been speaking with Brian and have met with him. So, Brian, welcome to the committee. I do appreciate everything that you have done on behalf of this group so far. It certainly has given us an awful lot of detail to be able to advocate for people like yourself. And I've had a significant number of people within my constituency who have expressed similar concerns and would hope that the government would come forward in supporting them. I suppose I'm quite keen to hear about your experience and your reasons why you would have moved from a PAYE job to self-employed and what benefits that brought to you, I suppose, your family life and other opportunities. Because I think, you know, when we look at employment and self-employed and entrepreneurship, we do so on the basis that we can facilitate this new way of working, because lives aren't 9 to 5 anymore, and certainly in the area you work, I worked in it myself a number of years ago, it isn't 9 to 5 and it's not conducive to family life. You know, so all these things are being talked about by, you know, in other guises, but, you know, not supporting people like you who made that leap for reasons, you know, other than just, you know, becoming an entrepreneur. You know, I think it's important that the committee hears that, because it's what other people will be thinking when they want to make that leap. But then, sadly, if they're going to become newly self-employed, if we were to find ourselves in another situation like that, they may be discouraged. So I think it is important for you to share your experience as to why you chose to do that and what benefits that has to the economy, to childcare, to family life, and to all of those things.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you, Claire. I think for me, the biggest thing that drove me to make the move was family life, and I think that's really key in Northern Ireland. It drives a lot of things that we do, so probably missed out on a bit too much of my child growing up and not being able to, support the house financially, but not be there as much as I would want to be. Really sparked an interest to making that leap across. I saw a niche in the market with obviously a rise in national living wage that really affected our industry quite a lot in hospitality, because there was a low paid workforce there. So as that cost went up, obviously people couldn't afford as many chefs or managers and stuff like that. So they cut back on their staff, and I can really sort of fill in those gaps as and when they need me. I enjoy what I do, but I can pick and choose my work. But like I said at the start, the biggest deciding factor for me was people that had already done what I was going to do. And there isn't, you can never be too sure when you make these decisions to whether or not you'll be successful or not. Probably not having 7 months of work has made reflecting back on that jump a wee bit more difficult, because the figures aren't there to look at. But from what I experienced in the first 6 months, it was very positive, and I'm glad I made the jump. But the next person that comes to me, which they will do, and asks, is it worth it? My answer is not going to be the same answer that I got that made the jump. So therefore, it doesn't help grow this sort of small business and that taking that leap of faith. But that was the reason why I made the decision to do it was based around family life. And the thing that made me cross over was a reference from somebody else that had done it. It wasn't a scheme devised by Invest NI. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't an advert on TV. It was word of mouth.
Yeah. No, and that was going to be my follow-up question, that, if you had known then the lack of government support that would not be forthcoming if we were to find ourselves in this situation, would you take that leap? And yeah, you've answered that in suggesting no, that you potentially have to think twice about that. And I think that's disappointing from a government perspective, because, they are talking about all other types of policies where they want to help families, they want to help parents, but they're not supporting them. So this isn't just about getting a return on any grants or investments they make. It's also about actually trying to serve the people and the public and do the other parts of their job that are just as important. And childcare does fall within that, and family life does fall within that, and employment. I suppose another question I want to put to you too is that one of the points that I think sometimes the department probably tries to skim over, if I'm going to be honest, is the point around small, medium enterprises, and that is sole traders and self-employed people like yourself. And I do believe that underpins our entire economy. And if we pull the rug from beneath that sector within the economy, then I think then we're going to have great difficulties. But in 6 months to a year from now, the Minister's going to be announcing things in relation to recovery and how we recover in our economy. And there's going to be a big part of that will encourage new entrepreneurs. But what confidence, given someone who is newly an entrepreneur or newly self-employed, what confidence would you have in advising other people to take that leap into self-employment when, if again this thing would happen, they wouldn't be supported, and it's actually really risky in the world that we now live in? So do we encourage entrepreneurship anymore, or do we hold back, anticipating another pandemic or something similar?
I think the economic recovery plan that came out with the £73 million worth of bids really is based around promoting. When we haven't got out of where we are, I think the ministers maybe went a wee bit too early with that. And certainly that support now to hold on to what we have would be a massive advertisement going forward to promote new business. And, the private sector doesn't really rely on the economy minister too much, in fairness. We drive ourselves on, we work independently away from that. But whenever we do need to turn to the economy minister and the economy department, I think it is key that they are there to help when need be. And that, again, that is the biggest advertisement you can have for support, is actually giving support. And that in itself will grow the confidence that Northern Ireland needs to invest in SMEs, which are, you said, I think from our figures it's 94%, which is a pretty big number. And I would certainly, if I was driving economic growth, I would want that number on side as a total rather than bits and pieces.
Yeah. And I do think there is an opportunity, particularly for using the Minister's language around recovery, to support current entrepreneurs through an investment scheme, maybe through InvestNI. This happens all the time. Businesses connected with InvestNI are able to apply for schemes of up to £5,000 that will help them facilitate their business. So why not potentially look at this as an opportunity to reinvest in the people who have already established themselves as a business, rather than just looking at this as hardship and wondering whether they will get a return or not. Because if these businesses continue to exist, of course they're going to get a return. They themselves are investing in our economy, and I think that's where the thinking has to come from. I think maybe we do need to take a more positive stance from this, given where we are and given where the executive's focus now seems to be. But I do think there are opportunities for positive investment in those businesses that are already there, rather than trying to encourage new ones, leading them down a garden path where they won't be supported if this were to happen again. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Claire.
And move on then to Gary, and just not trying to rush anybody, but we have to be out of this room before 1:30, so if we try and keep it as succinct as possible, because we've still a fair bit to get through.
No problem. Chair, the benefit of, I suppose, being in my office is that I don't have to vacate this room, so I could keep you for a while. Brian, thanks for being here, and we've all been supportive of ensuring that you are heard at the committee, and I think that is very important. In terms of the 30,000 potential people involved, and I appreciate that may be the upper limit, and not all of those people will require maybe the same level of support. Maybe none may require support at all. In some cases, if they're, as I say, if they're back and opened again and working. In terms of your views around the sort of a targeted type approach, where are the, in terms of your own grouping, where are the specific maybe sectors that you see as almost being the largest grouping within that 30,000?
Well, I think the taxi drivers were probably the biggest group with the childminders that needed the support, and it was great to see the executive coming down and being proactive. Although we'll say 7 months down the line, proactive is maybe not the best word to use. Then you go into your B&Bs as well as another one where they really do drive a massive revenue through. So a tailored support towards them will go a long way to supporting tourism, which we know is a big sector in Northern Ireland. And then the newly self-employed, I think, is another one that, like I've said throughout the meeting, the free advertising and marketing that comes from successful businesses that are working successfully with the economy department is fantastic. The word of mouth is a common phrase in Northern Ireland for anything, and it's certainly no different within the private sector. The word of mouth really does carry a lot of clout, and one the bane of my life, probably TripAdvisor, one negative review outweighs 10 positives, and that I tend to do that and break it into things that I understand and certainly the average person can understand, but one negative business experience with the economy department will have a true detrimental effect going forward.
Okay, I think the Department for the Economy has got a clear and consistent message. I think the motion yesterday certainly was, it did pass unanimously. I think it is important that the Department do the necessary work. And I do appreciate that there's frustration around maybe the length of time that has taken. There'll be frustration around maybe the capacity involved in pulling all this stuff together. But look, I think it is important that as a committee we continue to press on this issue. I also think it is important that we do not get into a position where we are trying to bid one minister against the other. I'm speaking as elected reps as opposed to anything else, because I have heard the commentary around, well, just put in a bid and then it'll be up to the finance minister. Don't get me wrong, politically that may be the quick thing to do, because you can just put in a bid and say, well, that's your problem. But I think in terms of an executive, and the economy minister absolutely has a role to play, so it's not about taking it off her remit. But I think that if there's a collective strategic position within the executive as well, I think that will help the case. But I just want to say, look, we as a committee, we've heard the views, we have raised it, and I don't think it's not anybody's intention that we almost ignore the issue and it will go away. I don't think that anybody's under any illusion that will ever happen. I think it is important that we take all of the views on board. So thanks, Brian, for that.
Cheers, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. John,
thanks, Brian. Brian, in my previous life, I worked as a chef for 20 years. So I know the mentality of chefs, and you need to get the job done, and you need to move on to get the next job done. So look, without holding you back any further, you have our support. I'm still of the view that the decision has been made not to support you. It's the wrong decision. However, I think yesterday's debate in the Assembly was quite significant. The unanimous support across the chamber for this, I think, has placed the minister in a very difficult. But I don't think, in fairness, they set out to pick on your sector. The strategy, in my opinion, is wrong. The economic recovery strategy is wrong. It is too focused on a strategy which would have suited the economy in 2019. We need a strategy that suits the economy in 2020 and the first half of 2021, perhaps. And it goes back to what you said earlier. What we have, we hold. We need to secure the jobs we have, and then look towards those growth sectors, which is a small medium enterprise. And I welcome the fact that one of the economists earlier on said that he now expected InvestNI to now look more inwards at small medium enterprises as the basis of the economy, rather than chasing the bright lights of New York or Shanghai, or wherever it may be. We will have to go there again, but you guys are the foundation of our economy, and we need to get the support out to you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Sinead, can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Thank you very much, Brian, for coming along and addressing the committee today. And it's important that you continue to shine a light on those that have been left behind. I really don't have any questions for you today, apart from the fact that obviously, you've got the support of the committee behind you. And we too believe that, it's much harder to start a business. And what we need to do is protect those that are already started. It's not about new businesses, it's about the existing businesses. So again, just welcome you here today, and we will continue to support you.
Thank you very much, Sinead.
Okay. Sinead, thanks for that. Brian, thank you very much for your time this morning, and I think you've heard a strong message from members across the committee in relation to our support, and we'll continue to do what we can as a committee to highlight this issue and to hopefully find a resolution to it. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good luck, folks.
Okay, Brad.
So members, we are a bit pushed for time, so we're going to defer some of the agenda to next week. But I want to move us on to item 9.9 in your pack. Members will have received correspondence, and it's at page 83 of your table papers, from the chairperson of Belcoo Frac Free regarding research being considered by the department into petroleum licensing. There's a response from the department at page 86 to concerns raised, and the research and the associated research study and tender documents are there, and I'm just opening it up for myself here as well. So there is also an FAQs document by DFE on petroleum licensing at page 229 of your table papers, and a copy of the May petroleum licensing application consultation from May 2019 at page 258 of your table papers. I have to say I'm a bit bemused by what is contained within the the specification from the research, in particular in relation to scenario 3, which talks about increased demand. And I think given the context of the climate emergency that we face, and the huge opposition that there is to fracking in particular, I think that this is misguided. So if members are content that we write to the Minister to get an urgent update on the issues raised in the correspondence and the paperwork.
Great.
Yes, content.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so moving on then, item number 10 is any other businesses, and we have not indicated.
Flagged up. No.
No. Okay. Okay.
You can leave that.
So we're moving on then to item number 11, which is the date, time and place of the next meeting, and that is next Wednesday morning in room 30. So thank you.
Thank you, members.
Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.